Hello and welcome to this meeting of the Council of the Town of Oakville. I would invite everyone to join Council in O Canada. Thank you, everybody. As we begin, please join me in acknowledging the Indigenous history of our town. The treaty lands on which we live remind us that Oakville was settled by Indigenous white and Black pioneers who worked together to build a community of harmony and prosperity. We value our ongoing relationship with the Mississaugas of the Credit First Nation. And now, tonight, we have no regrets. Council, are there any declarations of pecuniary interest? Madam Clerk, I see no one leaping to declare one. I'm going to think there aren't any. Council, have you had an opportunity to make up your mind about the minutes that you've been given for our previous meetings as listed in the agenda in March and April? Councillor Dudek is moving acceptance and seconded by Councillor Knoll. Any objection? There being no objection, the minutes are adopted. Thank you, everybody. Now, Council, at this time, we have a public presentation by Terry Young, the interim president and CEO of the Independent Electricity System Operators, the IESO. And he's going to speak on the role of natural gas in Ontario's electricity system. We have a motion tonight, a notice of motion tonight, for consideration next month at the next council meeting, where the public will be invited to delegate. And since the IESO is one of the core agencies involved in trying to deal with this question of the role of natural gas, I thought it'd be a good idea to seed the future discussion with some information from Mr. Young. So, Mr. Young, you have the Zoom, as I've learned to say, and Council is looking forward to your information.
Thanks very much, Mayor Bowden. I appreciate the opportunity. Let me just start my video here. So I think the host has stopped it, but there we go. Thanks. Hello, everyone. Good evening. Thanks for the opportunity to be here. To talk to you a little bit about the role of natural gas in the electricity sector. You know, it's a privilege for me actually to appear before Oakville Council. I spent 30 years of my life living in Oakville, and if I recall correctly, I think I used to play baseball with the town councillor from Ward 2, Ray. Good evening, and I just wanted to say how happy I am to be here. You know, it's interesting to watch the involvement of Oakville in the energy electricity discussions. I read with interest your community energy plan, the strategy. Noted the interest in continuing to increase energy efficiency. I've had the opportunity to work with the mayor in terms of recognizing some of the gains that have been made in energy efficiency, particularly the new hospital, the Oakville Trafalgar Hospital. Had an opportunity to recognize the achievements there, and also thank Oakville for its role in the planning processes that we undertake. We have 21 different regions in the province, and we do planning for each one of those. And Oakville is part of the GTA West, the Halton Peel planning, and we will be wrapping up this planning cycle in June. At the end of June, we expect to produce a report. The plan will essentially show really looking at some growth expected, particularly in the northern part, in Brampton and other areas in the north of the region. But generally speaking, there's with respect to Oakville, yes, we continue to work with Oakville Hydro in terms of making sure those needs are met. As you mentioned, there certainly has been a lot of discussion around gas and the role of natural gas in the electricity sector. As the system operator, and just a little bit about the IESO, that we are responsible for managing the reliability of the bulk power systems, making sure that wherever you are in Ontario and whenever you need it, electricity is available. We work with the generators, we work with the distributors like Oakville Hydro, we work with the transmission company Hydro One to make sure that electricity can be delivered. We operate that system every 5 minutes, and hopefully when we come out of this, we can have council come and see our control center, which is not far from you, and certainly look forward to doing that. We also, as I mentioned, run the conservation program, but we plan for the next 5 minutes out to the next 20 years. And so every year we release our annual planning outlook that looks at what the needs are expected to be, and then we work to make sure that those needs can be met. So gas obviously plays a part in this, a big part in this. I would call it a critical part more than big, because as you go to the next slide, if I could, you'll see in this slide really the difference between how much gas is there versus how much we actually use it. And you'll see in this slide that gas represents about 30% of the installed capacity is gas. But if you look at how much we use it, it's only 7% of the electricity needs are met through natural gas. That means that at 93% non-carbon emitting, our electricity system is one of the cleanest in North America and probably one of the cleanest around the world. And so what you see here is nuclear that is really the workhorse that produces much of the electricity that's been used, followed by hydro, wind, and gas, and some solar as well, connected to the bulk power system. If I could get you to go to the next slide, you'll see how we use the gas. So you'll see on the right that there's very little gas, natural gas, that is being used. So we have our base load generation, nuclear and hydro principally, that's meeting our needs on an hour-to-hour, day-by-day. But as demands rise, and we are a summer peaking jurisdiction, which means when it gets hot and the air conditioning is running, we're using up to 30% more electricity during that day because of the air conditioning. And so you'll see our peaks climbing somewhere we measure this in megawatts, and you'll see it climbing around 20,000 megawatts at 5 o'clock on a hot summer afternoon. And in that, you'll see that gas, that's when we need it, and that's when gas is able to respond. With respect to gas, you can ramp it up when you need it, and you can shut it down when you don't. Whereas nuclear obviously is one of those outputs that runs constantly when it can. Same thing with some of the hydro, and obviously wind and solar would be there as well. So if you could go to the next slide, you see as we start to look at potentially relying and not being able to rely on gas, there's obviously certain things that we're going to have to consider. And because of the characteristics of gas, because of the uniqueness that it has and the ability to ramp up and down, as I said, we're obviously going to look to see whether or not, what sources of supply or responses from customers we would need in order to be able to do that. Think back to coal and the phase out of coal. It was announced in 2003. Was first set to be removed in 2007 and then 2009. And finally in 2014, the last coal facility was closed. And when we closed the coal plants, we had gas to rely on, because the characteristics of gas very much mirrored those of coal. And we don't have that fuel or that supply mix readily available in terms of replacing gas. So obviously we would need to look at new supply sources that could be developed, that could be available. And there's certain very much promising sources that are coming forward. I think of storage. I think of pairing our wind and solar facilities with storage. I think of increased energy efficiency, so more conservation. And those are some of the sources that we do know. I mean, obviously there's other work that's going on with respect to small modular reactors. And so there's a lot of promise, but right now we don't have that ability to be able to replace gas. There's been discussion around bringing in power from other jurisdictions. And yes, we do trade with Quebec, Manitoba, and places south to us on an hourly basis. But in terms of bringing that amount of electricity, it would depend on the price, the availability of that fuel. So we would want to make sure that if we had arrangements with a neighboring province, that Ontario's needs could be met when they needed to be met. And so that would be part of the arrangements we'd have to do. We'd have to make sure we had the transmission available to do it as well. And then, of course, there is the costs. When I think of coal and I think of the time required, I also think of the cost. And our bills increased by about 27%, I'd say, as we phased out coal. So again, not saying that this can't be done. I'm saying that in doing so, we need a very comprehensive plan, and one that will take us some time to carry out. So what would that look like? We are beginning a study to see what phasing out of gas would look like. What are the reliability concerns that would have to be addressed? What are the cost issues that would be arriving if we were going to do without this resource? And so that study is starting. We're getting some input and things that people want us to look at, and we expect to get underway next month. And then we expect to have this study done in the fall, at which point in time I would make the offer for the ISO to come back and present the results of that study. If I could go to the next slide, please. So the other thing I think that's worth noting here is that I think if your overall objective is to reduce emissions, we're certainly, the electricity sector, as clean as it is now, as clean as it could be, it certainly has the potential to do more with respect to reducing emissions overall. This shows you just that in terms of the overall emissions, obviously transportation is the big one, and the electricity production is about 3%. So very clean system that could do more with respect to reducing overall emissions. If I could go to the next slide. So what are the opportunities to do this? And again, I'm pleased to see in Oakville's plans their focus on energy efficiency. Certainly that can play a role. There's the ability for different types of generation to be sited in regions and communities across the province. We are seeing a lot of emerging technologies like energy storage, which we know can play a bigger role going forward in terms of meeting that. And then as I mentioned, in terms of the ability for the electricity sector overall to reduce emissions in this province. And then if I can go to my last slide, what I would simply say here is that if we are going to look at this, and we will be guided by the policy that is set and the implementation of that policy. But what we would like to do is have the ability to put together a comprehensive plan to do that. That to invest in the supply that's needed, make sure that our system can handle the new supply mix. Ontario is very fortunate to have such a diverse supply mix right now, and we want to. And the challenge with the electricity sector, if you plug a hole here, another one appears somewhere else, and so we might want to make sure that all the interdependencies are looked at. And then, of course, we just make sure that everyone understands the risks and the costs that are associated with doing it. So again, I'd leave you with that. It will take us some time to do this, but with respect to how much time that would take and when that's achievable, that's one of the things that our study is going to be looking at.
Well, thank you very much, Mr. Young. I appreciate you seeding the conversation, and I look forward to having you back in the fall when you can discuss either your plan or your options for a plan. I know that there's always slippage and things, so let's leave it at one or the other. Council, you may want to wait till then, but I see two hands up, and I thank you for using your electronic hands. Councillor O'Meara and Councillor Giddings.
Thank you, Your Worship, and thank you very much for the presentation, Terry. On that one slide that had supply capacity and output, how can the supply capacity of nuclear be 34%, but the output is 60%?
Because that's just how much it's running. So so nuclear, runs flat out if it can. So even though it's makes up a third of all the megawatts that are available, if you will, we're using those megawatts much more than the others. So it's when you look at it, nuclear produces about 60 or more % of the electricity that's used in Ontario. Hydro is about 25%, and then the remaining 15% is shared between nuclear or between wind, solar, and gas. So it really is just how much we're using those particular sources. We're not. And in the case of gas, as I said, it has a limited but a very critical role in terms of being able to make sure that when demands are the highest, we have the ability to respond to those demands.
Okay, thank you for that. I was a little puzzled with that one. And then I know your job is very much so on the operational understanding of things, and sometimes the aspirational and the operational don't really intersect. But from an aspirational viewpoint, would this be somewhere where the IESO would want to get anyway? If there were no timelines on it, is this something that would be a goal of the IESO in any range?
I think from the IESO perspective, first and foremost, it's about reliability of the power system. But we're proud of how clean the power system is that we operate, and we're also obviously very concerned about costs. So we want to make sure that electricity is affordable, but in terms of reducing the emissions and providing a better environment for all of us, I think that's a goal for everyone. It's just how you do it. And there are new technologies that are emerging. I think of carbon capture. I think of storage. I think of hydrogen. I think of other fuels and other sources that are developing. And if we can utilize those, then that impact on the emissions impact on the environment can be less than it is today. And that's something that we very much would be interested in looking at to see how we could achieve that.
Thank you very much, Mr. Young. Thank you, Your Worship.
Thank you, Councillor. In fact, before you joined us on council, quite a few years ago, council and I paid a visit. The IESO invited us to pay a visit to their headquarters, which happens to be very close to Oakville, and we were quite amazed. It's quite a good display of how it is that your capacity and your use aren't the same, and why that is. And so when Mr. Young offered us a return visit earlier this evening, I thought that was a lovely thing, and I do hope we're all able to get out in public and go to places again someday. So Councillor Giddings, I think, was next, and then Councillor Chisholm. And then Councillor
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Councillor Romero read my mind.
All righty, then Councillor Chisholm, and then Councillor Lischin.
Thank you, Your Worship. Hello, Terry. How are you?
Good, how are you doing, Ray? Good to see you.
You're getting younger every year.
I know, even though our baseball careers may be over.
Over long ago. Just a quick question with respect to, I'm very pleased that you're moving towards a comprehensive study with respect to the opportunity of a gas fire generation to be removed maybe down the line sometime. A transition period with respect to other sources of coming into play, whether it be Quebec moving in trunk lines for hydro and so forth. But is with any consideration of putting a moratorium on rebuilding any of the nuclear stations with respect to that? Because it seems that we've gotten out of the coal fire and now we're in gas, and now nuclear is coming up and the aging facilities. Is there intent or a design to reduce that or eliminate that and move into other resources for electrical power?
Some of that is happening. In fact, if you look at so each year we will produce this report that it's called the Annual Planning Outlook, and it's available on our site, as our, many if not all of our reports are there. And one of the features of this report is to show where emissions are going. And you will see emissions climbing. I mean, they're still nowhere near they were in, say, 2005. And we don't see them going back there. But we will see emissions climbing because two reasons, really. First, we're starting to see some of the nuclear units being refurbished. So as they get taken out, so if you think about a Darlington unit that's 900 megawatts, it's a fairly significant producer. And as it gets taken out, we've got to look for other supplies to replace that, including gas. And so you will see some increased emissions. And then one of the things to note as well is the Pickering facility. So Pickering nuclear station's been around since the early 70s, and it's set to retire in the next couple of years by the end, I believe, of 2025. And so that's 3,000 megawatts that are coming out of line. And when you think of installed capacity of 35,000 megawatts, 3,000 is a significant portion. And so we are looking to see how to replace those. And again, this is where I see the emergence of new technologies, of local solutions, where communities can better meet their own needs than they had in the past. And so I think, and more communities like Oakville are taking a real interest in doing that. So can you replace nuclear? I think you've got to remember the big contribution that nuclear makes right now. And then, but for sure, we are seeing a changing electricity sector. It's interesting, I think of the last decade with coal coming out, big transition in the sector, more solar, more wind. But when I look at the next decade, I see even more change than we saw over the last 10 years.
Thanks, Terry. That's a comfort with your discussion with respect to that. I just don't want to see a trade-off where nuclear is being declining and we're going to just increase gas-fired electricity. So this is good with all the alternate sources that you're looking at and the availability, whether it be from Quebec or from efficiencies, whatever the case may be. So it's good. It seems to be a lot of strings attached to this with respect to where we're going to get our electricity in the next 25 to 30 years.
Yeah, and I can't speak enough about the importance of communities looking after their own needs as well. And that's what's so encouraging when I see the Oakville energy plan and the goals that have been set and their desire, the community's desire to be part of that solution going forward. And that's certainly a big change that we've seen. And I think you're going to see much more of that in the next decade.
province should be looking at the town of Oakville's initiatives. I rest my case.
I'll leave that to the mayor.
Well, I thank you both for the opportunity for a little virtual bouquet there. Councillor Chinna?
Thank you, Your Worship. Good evening, Mr. Young. Thank you for your presentation. So my understanding is that Quebec is a major hydroelectric generator and sends a lot of their electricity or cells down to their next door neighbor to the south. So I'm wondering, in the last 15 to 20 years, how has the IESO advocated for this partnership between Ontario and Quebec? Why isn't it taking it so long to I mean, we're talking about it now, but what happened 15, 20 years ago when these coal-fired plants were being closed here? Why was this not the major option?
Well, I think it's always been an option, and it's always, we trade with Quebec on a regular basis. And I think when you think about our needs, we're a summer peaking jurisdiction, so our demands are highest in the summer. In Quebec, their demands are highest in the winter. So there's a natural trading arrangement there, and we have had deals in the past where we've been available for them in the winter, and they've been available for us in the summer. And so that does happen. We do buy power from Quebec regularly. They buy power from us regularly. In terms of the types of deals, though, where you're bringing in a significant amount of electricity, if you will, it's dependent on two things really. Number one, cost, and the price at which you're going to pay, and so obviously if we're going to be relying on Quebec to meet needs in Ontario, and it wasn't so long ago, in fact, I think of 2005, 2006, where we had highest use of electricity ever in the summers then, and we were very reliant on other jurisdictions to supply power to us, but we were also paying the price for that. And so when you're setting these deals, you've got to understand whether this electricity is firm or whether it's not. It's a non-firm transaction, and by firm I mean that if we have the need for power, and so does Quebec, then our needs wouldn't be set aside, right? That there would be firm arrangements for power to be delivered to Ontario, and obviously that's going to come at a price. But the second part of that is the infrastructure that you would need to do that. And by that I mean the transmission capability to bring that power from Quebec to Oakville. And we would have to make sure that new transmission could be built to support that.
And do you have any estimates of what kind of capital investment would be necessary for that type of transmission?
No, I mean, it would be significant, in terms of, we did a study in 2017, and I'd have to refresh myself on what that looked at, but it is a significant cost, but it's also, obviously there are going to be significant regulatory approvals required as you're bringing this line across the province. And which again speaks to where many jurisdictions are going with in terms of decentralization, right? Because your power is available right where you are, right? And I think this is also one of the things about gas today is that it is near the cities that it's serving. So I think of the Halton Hills facility, let's say on just north of 401 there around Trafalgar. And again, it's close to the urban center it's serving. And when you start to take gas out, then you've got to understand where you're going to put the new facilities, what type they are, and how you're going to get to the power to places like Oakville.
Okay, so based on the transmission lines that we have currently, say if we don't invest any additional money into that, what is the biggest percentage of hydroelectricity we can get from Quebec at this point in time?
Oh, it wouldn't be significant in terms of how much we are using today in terms of total replacement. There are opportunities for us to import electricity, just as there are opportunities for Quebec to sell electricity to us. It happens.
So like less than 1% of our.
Is met. Well, less than 1% is what we have now, because we also. Don't forget, Ontario's in a position where it has surplus electricity, right? We're an exporter of electricity. We
Right,
you know,
but we've
have-
also been paying quite the high prices compared to Quebec, so that's why I was asking that question as well. Thank you
Yeah,
very
but-
much, sir.
Sorry, the only point I would say on that is that hydroelectric facilities that were built years ago, which is what Hydro-Quebec has a lot of, are going to be cheaper than many other resources.
All right, thank you very much, Mr. Young. As I said before, we look forward to your return and, if possible, a visit to the facilities. Among the many things that people don't like besides gas plants in their neighborhood is transmission lines. And so all schemes that involve building transmission lines from Quebec bring with them the specter of lots and lots of public anger about where they're going to go. So we'll have to see how all of that unfolds. Council, I just want to give Mr. Young one little compliment and thanks. Years ago, he came to make a presentation to Oakville Hydro. And in that presentation, he must have had a brand new strategic plan or something. He talked about their top goals. And we had just finished ours, and we had agreed to make our number one top goal, more important than profit, more important than anything else, employee and public safety. And I asked him why they didn't do it, and he gave me a very skillful answer, and at the end of it, I challenged him to at least get the IESO board to add safety somewhere on that list. And ladies and gentlemen, he did it. And for that, I really admire him. And Terry, it's been a wonderful, it's been a long wait to thank you in public for that, but I do appreciate very much you doing that. So thank you very much.
Thank you for the opportunity to be here, and it's an important discussion, and I'm glad that this council is part of that discussion. So thanks again for the opportunity to provide some information.
Thanks so much. We look forward to the visit. There's me being the optimist again. All right. Now, council, it's our custom to resolve into committee of the whole here. So are there two of you who'd like to do that? Councilor Lischina, Councilor Grant, any objection? None saying it carries, and we're now in committee of the whole. Can I ask for a motion for the consent items? Councilor Dudek, thank you. Is there an objection to the consent items? Madam Clerk, there's no objection. The consent items are adopted. So now we need number 9, our first discussion item. And this is the COVID update, and we have a verbal presentation this evening, I believe accompanied by slides, from our CAO, Jane Closey, and Jim Berry, our Director of, among other things, Municipal Enforcement. Jane, you have the Zoom now.
Mayor, members of council, today I think I have a slightly better news than I did at the last update that I had given at council last month. And also, as the mayor had mentioned, Jim Berry, our Director of Municipal Enforcement, will be giving you an update on our enforcement program moving forward. So then after that, both of us would be available for any questions. Do I move the slides or does someone? Oh, okay. So you can see here the 3 waves of COVID. And I think the good news is that it seems we are reaching a plateau and, dare I say, actually declining. The reproductive rate in Halton has dropped below 1, so that's very positive news. Within Oakville itself, we have about 261 active cases, and about 20% of the total number of cases that we had within Oakville are related to variant cases. And on the next slide, the vaccination program is really proceeding quite well. If you look at the numbers there, it shows about over 170,000 people that have received at least their first vaccination. And that represents 34% of the population within the region, which is really very positive. I think there's similar numbers throughout the country. Oakville, Halton, the province, and the country are moving in a very good direction in terms of providing safety for all our residents. So we are, if you can stay on that slide for a minute more, we are based on the provincial plan in terms of the priority of the eligibility rollout. We are still in phase 2, which is really focused on rolling out the vaccination to age groups as well as those who are most at risk. And although no date has been attached to that, we are looking towards the summer in order to move into phase 3, where we can look at the vaccination of all residents 16 up to 59. Next slide. Can you hear me? Okay. We certainly through our social media are strongly encouraging anyone who's eligible for vaccination to get a vaccination. That's our only way to move out of this pandemic, so it is something that we encourage not only through our media but also in our staff groups. So in Oakville, we have the AstraZeneca, which is also available for those 40 and over. And there's about 24 participating pharmacies within Oakville. There is actually one that has 24/7 service up on Third Line. It's the Shoppers Drug Mart. So there's lots of opportunities in order to book. And on the next slide is the eligibility for the vaccine. You've seen changes almost every week in terms of those who now have eligibility for the vaccination. The most recent one was today, actually, where the booking has been opened up to any individuals that are pregnant so they can go and get their booking done. Again, the eligibility is set by the province and the region is following that eligibility requirements. I would encourage, there actually are a number of eligible residents who could get the vaccination. So the region's website is a great source in order to be able to understand what that is. And of course, as I think everyone has said throughout this, the continuation of the vaccination program is dependent on supply. And I know that the region is, whatever supply they are getting, they are delivering very quickly into the arms of our residents. So it's proceeded along quite well. The next slide. With the opening up of the province's criteria to vaccinate eligible workers who can't work from home, that was a program started about 2 weeks ago. So the bookings can occur for those. So in terms of staff groups, we have provided letters to all our staff that fit within that group 1. We did coordinate with the other municipalities within Halton to ensure that we had interpreted the provincial requirements appropriately throughout the region, and so there's quite a bit of similarity between all the municipalities and the region. Generally, the eligible workers would fall into enforcement, cemetery workers, and fire, which has actually already been vaccinated. So that would generally describe the groups that fit within those categories. We are awaiting some clarification, and again, we'll do a coordination when they roll out group 2, which is a lot more extensive group for those who cannot work from home. And in terms of the availability to get a vaccination for staff, we are opening that up for them to book appointments whenever it's possible, because you can't always choose the exact date of the appointments. And we are giving them staff or time off in order to allow those vaccinations to occur. And all our messaging is encouraging them as much as possible to get out and get the vaccine. So if I can move to the next slide. The stay-at-home order from the province. They extended that out into May 20th. So you see the listing here of the things that we are not to do, actually. So the outdoor social gatherings, the public events are prohibited with very limited exceptions to that. There is a closure of non-essential construction. So it does cover off residential construction that can continue, anything related to the health industry. There are some office type of employment that are restricted, and we're working through those details right now, certainly within our building department. There is a reduction in the capacity of retail, and that is for retail that is essential, selling of groceries and those types of things, but there's always the pickup and delivery that's available for other retail establishments. The closure of all the outdoor recreational amenities was not met with a great deal of acceptance from the public. But it does cover the golf courses, basketball courts, soccer fields, those types of things. And the town has complied with those requirements. It's a provincial legislation, and so reflecting that, we have closed those facilities. And in terms of the marinas, they are open to allow you to work on your boats, so that as soon as the season is ready and available, hopefully the restrictions have changed so that you can actually get out and do recreational boating, which is at this point in time would not be permitted. So that's a summary of the stay-at-home order and how it has implication on our services. And on the next slide, looking forward to the summer, we are starting to look. So the virtual program offerings, certainly we're continuing with those. They've been quite successful. We are looking at them in all those areas in order to continue with that program. We are preparing for the summer with hopes that we'll move to the red control zone that the province had put out. So in preparation for that, we're looking at, for example, the 5 outdoor pools, which were quite a hit last year, having them open a little bit earlier than they have in previous years. Day camps for July and August. And again, that is all dependent on us moving out of the stay-at-home order into a red or even a better control zone. Next slide. There was one, the Oakville Chamber of Commerce actually has partnered and getting in self-screening, the quick, I've forgotten the name of it, but the fast tests. So they are looking at providing those tests to small, medium employers within Oakville who employ 150 or less employees. So we have been working with the Chamber in order to provide the accessibility to those vaccines. We are storing them at the post office so that they can be distributed through their program. And we'll be putting out a media release next week on that as well. So that is good news for the employers within the town. And the next slide. So it has been a challenge over, particularly the last couple of weeks. We've been over a year in this pandemic. I think people are definitely getting frustrated. I know I'd like life to go back to a little bit more normal. And so we've looked at sending out a different message through our social media. I keep on going in and out of my mic. We're asking really for patience from the public. And so our main message is be kind. We are all in this together as we move forward through the rest of this pandemic. So with that, I'm going to close. I'm going to ask Jim to give a presentation on the enforcement, and then we'll both be available for questions.
Good evening. Oh, this mic is working. Right. Thank you very much. Good evening, Mr. Mayor, members of council. I'm happy to be here tonight to give you an update on municipal enforcement and our response to the pandemic so far. Next slide, please. I'd like to start by just going over our approach in general, municipal enforcement's approach, as we look on any enforcement, whether it's the pandemic or day-to-day enforcement. And that includes voluntary compliance, complaint and risk-based investigations, reasonable, transparent, and proportionate enforcement. And I think this is important because last March, municipal enforcement was asked to step in and take on an enhanced role in enforcement. And I think it's very important that everybody understands that although it's a different enforcement, the approach hasn't changed. It's always education first. Next slide, please. This slide goes over a bit of the enforcement activity, and it provides an overview from 2019, 2020, and 2021. 2019 being a base year, and from this you can see that in an average year you're looking at about 13,000 calls to municipal enforcement. In 2020, that rose dramatically to 84% rise in calls. And that seems to be continuing through in 2021. The bylaw investigation category, the top category there, is increased again this year by over 1,000 calls. And those are the calls mostly related to COVID. They're all time-consuming calls and the calls that are really driving resource demands on our municipal enforcement staff. The licensing investigations and parking investigations are down, and that's really to be expected. Licensing enforcement has moved to a reactive mode, and parking enforcement, if you'll recall, we've implemented a paid parking program across the town for residential streets. So generally, people do have the ability to obtain permits to park, something they didn't before. So although there's a 32% drop so far this year over last, the volume of time-consuming calls is remaining higher than last year. Next slide, please. This slide just adds a bit more clarity to the enforcement that's being conducted. What you'll see here is a comparison of January 1st to April 15th of both 2020 and 2021. I'd like to point out a couple of things from these slides. One, the normal investigation types, your lot maintenance, noise, zoning, etc., have all stayed relatively similar. So the volume of work that's coming in those areas are relatively similar as they were before COVID-19. The COVID-specific numbers, again, they're increasing. So you can see the duplicate in volume or enforcement requests that are coming in, causing, again, pressures on our enforcement staff. Next slide, please. This is one more slide just to put a bit of a finer point on enforcement. This slide further breaks down the COVID-19 enforcement case types. The bulk of 2020 COVID-19 enforcement was proactive. So what you'll see is, the bulk of 2020 enforcement was proactive in school enforcement with over 9,000 investigations. Now I'm back. Sorry. Reactive park enforcement added another 348 investigations, and physical distancing 440. I would note that all of these calls take significant time, so reactive and proactive park enforcement generally takes about an hour and 2 officers to conduct. If they actually run into anything when they're conducting the investigation or have to lay charges, that time can be dramatically extended. Looking at 2021 so far, proactive park enforcement has continued to grow with more than 1,330 investigations. In addition, there have been 157 reactive park investigations and 164 social gathering investigations, and these are gaining speed, and our officers are responding to these a lot more frequently than before. So based on these numbers, I anticipate 2021 will be more challenging than 2020 for resource issues. Sorry, is that coming through okay? Yeah. Next slide, please. Moving into resource category, this slide depicts enforcement resources that Council has made available to respond to As you can see, 2019 is a standard year, and municipal enforcement has about 21 officers in its complement to respond to a wide variety of enforcement calls excluding animal control. In response to the pandemic in 2020, that complement was increased by 23%, or 5 officers, which were redeployed from other areas of the town into municipal enforcement. As you can see that, if you recall, the increased enforcement request was up about 84%. So this 23% didn't achieve the goal, and we had to reduce service levels across the board to try and maintain COVID enforcement and still keep up as much as possible with day-to-day enforcement. In 2021, we've made some significant changes as far as enforcement. We've added 8 additional mobile compliance officers and 8 additional park officers, which will be available to us in May of this year. The mobile compliance officers will patrol as regular officers throughout the town, and the park officers will be assigned to our waterfront areas to try and manage congregation limits and traffic issues in those areas. So in total, you're looking at about a 76% increase over our 2019 numbers to attempt to mitigate the stressors put on by COVID-19. In addition to the complement, the ambassador program, so the park ambassador program has also been moved to municipal enforcement, and 15 full-time park ambassadors have also been added. So this will allow us to essentially create a tiered enforcement programs to make sure that we have a significant amount of education followed up only after the education by enforcement. Next slide, please. I'm putting this map in really just to show that the impacts of COVID-19 aren't just a single or one or two areas across the town. This is a heat map showing all the areas officers are responding to across the town for COVID-19 issues. And I think it really captures the resource requirements required to deal. Next slide, please. Municipal enforcement has taken several actions to respond to the pandemic. Sorry. All right, try this without, see if I can't avoid breaking something here. Municipal enforcement has taken several actions to respond to the pandemic. As already discussed, there's a significant complement increase to respond to the 84% increase in calls. We've also redeployed municipal standards investigators from their normal duties, putting them in uniforms and in vehicles to augment the enforcement staff that are on the road. We've also built and maintained partnerships with the Health Department, Halton Regional Police, and municipal enforcement departments across the region to try and ensure we can respond most effectively to pandemic issues. And this has taken the form of a few different things. Police on Parks Patrol is a partnership between the town and Halton Regional Police to patrol our parks. Our motorcycle noise enforcement program, again a partnership program with Halton Regional Police to deal with loud motorcycles. A multi-ministry task force, officers from multiple ministries and local enforcement agencies ensuring COVID compliance at industrial and commercial locations. We have regional enforcement committee meetings on a regular basis to make sure we're all understanding the regulations in a similar fashion. And we report regularly to the Minister of the Solicitor General on enforcement actions taken related to COVID-19. To address resident and business concerns, other new initiatives have been implemented, including at the beginning of the pandemic, suspending residential time limit parking, and followed that up again with our on-street paid parking program. We've implemented special provision areas last year, and on tonight's agenda earlier in the consent agenda item, there was a similar program approved. We've added curbside pickup spaces in the BIAs. We've switched to email application submissions for business licenses, added virtual hearings and screenings, extended business licenses in 2020, and extended the model year of taxi cab responding to industry concerns. Next slide, please. As mentioned earlier, at the beginning of the pandemic, the enforcement team was given new responsibilities to enforce provincial orders. Staff adjusted and focused resources to meet those needs. New enforcement types were undertaken, including congregation limits, mask violations, businesses operating when they shouldn't, construction operating when it shouldn't. I would note that residents and businesses also adjusted quite well during that time. Those first few months in the summer and spring mostly provided everybody seemed to comply as much as possible. As time has gone on and regulations have changed, often with little warning, it's been more difficult for staff to keep up with changes. Our officers are seen as experts on the regulations in the fields as they're enforcing them, and with multiple changes and lags in enforcement time, or information time, information is not getting to the officers, and therefore it's becoming difficult for them to provide that information to to residents. As previously noted, residents did respond in a positive manner through the spring and summer, but as the pandemic has drawn on, the extent of compliance is dramatic. We've seen a dramatic reduction in the extent of compliance. Although staff are still focusing on education, rising tensions are adding a great deal of stress and pressure on the staff. Our municipality is also not immune to the anti-lockdown sentiment, and our officers have had to deal with that in their enforcement activity. Officers have also had to deal with personal safety concerns as frontline responders. As shown in my initial slides, officers are dealing with a large number of calls and often with a large number of people. So as part of their job, they're putting their safety at risk when they're going into those calls. All of this said, fatigue is another issue. In order to meet COVID-19 demands, we're asking our staff to work a significant amount of overtime. Even with additional officers, as summer comes closer, our senior staff will take vacation, and again, we'll have resource demand issues over those times that we're going to have difficulty covering. Considering all of this and the extent of enforcement workload, we need to consider options to refocus efforts to better support the community and our officers. Next slide, please. As we move forward, staff are recommending the following. Officers will continue to focus on education first. Progressive enforcement will always be our primary focus. That the Municipal Enforcement Department will also have to reduce project work. New bylaws, programs, and initiatives will need to be delayed in order to continue to put existing resources towards the pandemic. The Municipal Enforcement Project Plan will be reassessed and projects pushed out where that's possible. Finally, service levels will be adjusted. Staff are reviewing enforcement priorities to establish a response protocol that will maintain immediate responses. So we will continue to respond to life safety matters such as property standards issues, municipal right-of-way issues, and COVID-19 requests. But some lower priority investigations like sign bylaw requests and graffiti calls, those types of calls will be extended. They're normally a 5-day response time. They'll be pushed out to 15 or 30 days. A full review is underway and will be presented to Council through the town's emergency control group. But I believe these are the steps that are necessary to make sure that we can continue to respond to the safety matters and protect our officers. Next slide, please. In closing, I wanted to highlight the best way to reach municipal enforcement at any time, 24/7, and that's to call the town at 905-845-6601 or email service@oakville.ca. Residents can also go online and use the town's Report a Problem tool to register complaints about many types of complaints. And I'm happy to answer any questions.
Thank you very much, Mr. Barry and Ms. Closey. Let me see who wants to go first with questions. Councillor Lischina would be that one. Councillor Lischina, and then we have, well, half of council, so get ready.
Your Worship, I saw some electronic hands up, and then I was thinking to put my electronic, so I shouldn't go first. Whoever had their electronic hand.
Go ahead. Enjoy the privilege.
I'm picking up the electronic hand as of today, so apologies to everybody. Jane, thank you for your presentation. My question, actually driving home from clinic this morning or this afternoon, I was hearing about media reports with respect to potentially moving half of the supply coming into Ontario to hotspots. So has there been any information given to the region or the municipalities about potentially decreased supply in areas that are not hotspots?
Through just the information I've received from the region and working with the other CIOs, there's been some reductions in some of the products, but other products have increased. So I would say not a substantial decline in the products themselves. There has been some switching around in terms of which ones have been transferred into the hot areas, but I don't understand there'd be a significant decline.
I probably should know this, the answer to this question. So how far in advance are we booking right now? Is it a week or?
I think they're extending a little bit beyond that. So when you book an appointment, it could
Okay.
be 1 to 2 weeks before the appointment is actually scheduled.
Okay.
Yeah, Councillor.
And one more.
Councillor.
Sorry, go ahead.
Councillor Lischina, at Regional Council on Wednesday, which is not a meeting that CAO closely attends, so it's a little bit unfair to let her dangle there with that information. The region has the capacity, we were briefed, to deliver 7,200 doses a week. And we've been delivering, because of supply, 3,100. And because of the 25% cut and the fact that we only get our allocation, we only get a promise of our allocation a week in advance, we can't book much further than that. And we're anticipating going down with the 25% cut that's already been announced to 1,700. And I'm sorry, I misspoke about a day. So capacity to do 7,200, been doing 3,100, and we're expecting our ability, because of supply, to fall to 1,700 a day, and that's with the 25%. So the 50%, if it goes through, will presumably reduce here as well, reduce our daily ability even more.
Okay.
If you go on the region's COVID page, right now you're going to see that it appears for several days, it's like 5-6 days now since we peaked or appear to have peaked. This is a tricky bug, this virus, and it could, if we lose our discipline, we could go back up without continuing down. But right now it appears that we've peaked, and our number on Saturday got under 1. On Sunday it went back to 1. Today it's down to 0.9 again, like it was on Saturday. And these are
Well, let's hope it keeps going
really
down.
good signs. But the point that you've opened up to make here is that without continued discipline, we could easily go back up, especially since there's a diversion of vaccine supply to the hotspots.
Okay. And I just have one question for Jim. Is Jim there somewhere? Okay. So Jim, you mentioned that we have 2 officers going out to park calls. So is that, I'm assuming that's for safety purposes? Or is that the case?
Through you, Mr. Mayor, yes, for safety purposes, and often the workload actually requires that.
I see. So with respect to the POP project, the Police on Park Patrol, I mean, sometimes I've seen both the police and, like, from last season and the bylaw. So is there a way usually that we go there first, or whoever gets there on scene first? How does that work?
Through you, Mr. Mayor, it's actually a program that incorporates all of them together. So the Halton Regional Police and bylaw staff go out as a group, and they deal with, they triage issues they find when they get to the park. So there may be criminal issues that the police will deal with. At the same time, if they come across bylaw issues, our officers will deal with those.
Okay, thank you.
All right, thank you, Councillor Lischina. Councillor O'Meara, and then Councillor Giddings, and then Councillor Adams.
Thank you, Worship. Thank you, Jane and Jim, for that. Jim, just some questions about construction sites. Is the Ministry of Labor inspecting those, or are bylaw officers inspecting those?
Through you, Mr. Mayor, to the councillor, is that, when you say inspecting them, for COVID issues?
Yes, COVID compliance, these sorts of things.
It's the ministry.
Okay, so we wouldn't be going, if we get a call, would we go, or would we call Ministry of Labor then?
Through you, Mr. Mayor, if we get a call, we would deal with a construction site that was operating against the act. So if that type of construction wasn't permitted, we would deal with that. But if there's actually COVID issues on the site, so workers not distancing, not wearing masks, those types of things, it's the ministry.
Okay. Okay, thanks for that. The question about the marinas, we were told that they're not supposed to be open and you can only do work on them. I've seen a couple dozen boats in the water already. So can you tell me what's going on? Are boats allowed to be in the water right now, or are they not allowed to be in the water?
Under the provincial orders, we understand they're not to be in the water now, that you can go and repair your boat and get it ready and put it in the water, but to take it out into the water, recreational boating is not permitted.
Okay, sorry. So yeah, my language, I guess they're allowed to be sitting at dock in the water, but they're not allowed to be driven. Is that what I'm understanding?
That's our understanding of the provincial requirements.
Okay. Glad we got that one figured out here. And then just in terms, I know everybody's got this anti-lockdown group and anti-vaccine, and we've had a few protests. And I know that we are working on a progressive enforcement mode, but what's our position on that sort of thing? Are we going to ask people nicely not to do what they already know they shouldn't be doing, or are we going to be leveling fines if that happens?
Through you, Mr. Mayor. Well, there's probably two answers to that. We always try and ask people not to do what if we find them in violation, we always try to ask them not to violate. And that's for a couple of reasons. I mean, if we do have to lay charges, that is always excellent evidence to say officers took that extra step. We're more likely to get convictions when we do that. What I think to your point is, if people don't comply, we will lay charges, and we have laid charges throughout the pandemic.
Yeah, thanks for that. I know there was a I guess I don't want to say protest, but there was a gathering in Guelph. We saw a gathering in Barrie recently. And I would just dare say that I don't think there is any appetite at all for the public to tolerate that sort of purposeful flaunting of the rules here. So I'm glad that we're on that page, but I just want to echo some of the sentiments that I hear on a day-to-day when talking on the phone or email with people who are witnessing that type of behavior. So thank you very much for everything you're doing. Thank you, Your Worship.
Thank you, Councillor O'Meara. Councillor Giddings?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Jim, CAO Closey was talking about the sports that aren't allowed. And she mentioned golf, basketball, soccer. It's actually quite a long list, is it not? In terms of tennis, rugby, any team play, correct?
Through you, Mr. Mayor, yes, the last changes to the Act essentially shut down all sports activity.
And we have reached out to our clubs and teams and permitted users to make them all aware of that.
I guess we have reached out to all of those. As soon as we understood what the provincial orders were, we reached out through our recreation departments.
So we would expect to see the various tennis courts, for example, that are fenced and able to be locked. Those should be locked, and so they're keep people off at this point.
That's correct. We locked the tennis courts and shut those because we could, and any other facilities that were lockable, we did that. On the basketball front, we actually took down some of the backboards and the nets to prevent play. So there were several actions we had taken. We had not, because this was during the weekend, and then the order about playgrounds was reversed, we had not cordoned off the playground areas. Areas that we're not able to easily fence off, we are looking at signing those areas.
I appreciate that. And last question, Jim mentioned that 2 officers will normally attend, especially when they're large groups. Do the groups tend to feign ignorance to it, that they weren't aware of it? I'm just wondering the depth of the problem in terms of whether people are actually aware of it or whether they're just going against the rules.
Through you, Mr. Mayor, it's probably a mixture. Certainly some people suggest they aren't aware, but the growing sentiment has definitely been pushing back. The fact that they're aware, they just don't want to comply.
All right. That's it, Mr. Mayor. Thanks for what you and your team are doing, Jim.
Thank you, Councillor Giddings. Councillor Adams, then Councillor Palmer and Councillor Sandu.
Thanks so much to staff for everything they've been working on. I've got one question for Jim, then one for Jane. So I'll start with Jim since I see him there. Jim, I have a quick question for you about the mask bylaw enforcement. You had a slide that showed a certain number of enforcement initiatives that have been put out there that are reactive. I'm assuming that there hasn't really been a lot of proactive initiatives to try to do enforcement of that. In terms of the reactive element of it, are we seeing intentional flouting of the bylaw going on that's being reported, and are we seeing it more frequently now than we were? Because my sense before, I think, was that we were getting, the vast majority of people were trying to comply with it to the extent that they could, and that there wasn't a whole lot of intentional exemption claiming going on. Is that the case, or am I missing it?
Through you, Mr. Mayor, I think I think the way I'd answer that is, again, at the beginning of the pandemic, we saw a lot of voluntary compliance, and again, that has waned. If I had to categorize it, we have seen a significant amount of non-compliance in younger groups as the pandemic has moved on, and officers see that as they go through the parks and in congregation limits and those types of things. That's really what I'm hearing.
And so, I'm perhaps a little bit less worried about the outside issue, it being outside, but in terms of it being in communal spaces like grocery stores and in indoor locations specifically, where people may not really have a choice to fully distance themselves. Are we seeing reports of that coming up more frequently in the last couple of weeks?
Through you, Mr. Mayor, I would have to say no. I haven't seen reports of that. I think for the most part, I can think of one or two, but I don't think that has grown significantly.
Okay, so I think we've all seen the odd person in the store who's refusing or is not wearing a mask properly and that kind of thing. Okay, thank you very much, Jim. I appreciate all the efforts that our staff are undertaking. I know it's often a hard job, and perhaps in some cases thankless when you're having to enforce some of the park restrictions that are being required of us. I wonder if I could ask Jane a quick question about the phase 2, group 2 timing. Jane, it's perhaps unfair because it's not your duty to determine when group 2 gets to get vaccinated, but in terms of the discussions that you may have had with the other senior executives around Halton and perhaps outside of the municipal world, is there any indication about when the opening of the group 2 will occur or might occur?
We actually did have some discussion on that, and there is no specific date that's been defined, but the expectation would be it wouldn't be long after this group 1 has been announced. So I would be expecting it fairly soon.
So sometime in early May it might
Sometime in May, I would say, is more accurate.
Thank you very much. I appreciate that. Okay, that's all. Thank you very much, Your Worship.
Thank you, Councillor Adams. It's important to, I think, remind everybody that the federal government has been promising a huge increase in deliveries in May, and so we can hope for progress on that front. The next questioner is Councillor Sandu and then Councillor Palmer.
Thank you, Your Worship. I had actually just one question specifically for CAO Closey about construction. Councillor O'Meara kind of touched on this generally, but I wanted to have a little bit more specificity with regard to what's considered essential when it comes to construction. So we see obviously continued home construction in North Oakville, but are there other things that we should be aware of and more vigilant about as a community? Like are people still allowed to do patios and walkways and things like that?
So for this question, actually, I'd ask Doug Carr to sign in, because our general assessment of what was included in the non-essential construction was quite limited, I'll say. So home construction was included in quite a number of other things. But Doug can speak specifically to what we saw as being excluded.
Hello, everyone. Can you hear me okay?
Very well, thank you.
Well, yes, thank you, Jane. Yeah, interestingly, the word essential in connection with construction actually doesn't appear in the applicable order, which is Regulation 8220, which are the rules for areas in Stage 1, which are the rules that apply right now to the whole province. And the applicable schedule has a section 43 on construction, and it's a fairly detailed list of construction that is permitted. And so it's section 43, and it runs through A to M. And the CAO has indicated some of the more important permissions, including residential and site works for non-residential are permitted. And then there was also a reference to construction to facilitate the healthcare sector, new capacity in municipal infrastructure, provincial infrastructure. So there's a fairly detailed list. So if there's a specific item, Councillor, that you had a question about, I can try and assist you with.
No, Mr. Frey, I think that's pretty helpful. I think what would be helpful, and I'm not sure if everybody else in council would like to have this as well, if you could just copy and paste that part of the order. I'd like to just take a quick look. Thank you so much.
Happy to do that, yes.
All righty, thank you, Councillor Sandu. Councillor Palmer?
Thank you, Your Worship. My questions are for Director Barry. The first question is, you had a slide on the number of calls that were coming in, a comparison of 2019, 2020, 21. I was just wondering, is that including our COVID hotline, or was that only our COVID hotline? And then I just wanted an update on how that line is still being utilized, and if we have any data on the uptake of that.
Through you, Mr. Mayor, it would include any calls that came in and were registered as a call to our system. So the COVID hotline, sorry, excuse me, the COVID hotline feeds our system. So anything that comes in there would be captured in the data I showed you. I don't have a specific breakdown off the top of my head for that. We do monitor those calls on a weekly basis when we meet as the regional enforcement group. And those numbers, to my recollection, I think we're getting between 10 and 25 calls from that line per week.
Okay, thank you. And then my other question is around how we're tackling businesses operating from home when they shouldn't be. For example, somebody offering salon services from their home. Have we had any reports or complaints made by residents, and are we taking any proactive steps there? I mean, I know it's hard to manage that, but you know, sometimes on community forums, people are posting, you know, offers of online services that they're offering from home, and then you see a little bit of back and forth between residents, you know, trying to correct them. So I'm just wondering if we're taking any proactive steps there.
Through you, Mr. Mayor, that's actually always one of the most difficult investigations to be involved in. Number one, since it's a residence, there's no right of entry for an officer. The only way that you can ever get inside a private residence is with a search warrant or being invited in. But if somebody's actually violating a bylaw, they're likely not inviting an officer in. I'm aware of a couple investigations that have been underway recently because of complaints, and there's always a handful per year that we get involved in. But that's not one of the high priority issues that's being looked at right now when it relates to COVID.
Okay, thank you for that.
Thank you. Councillor Haslett-Deal. You may be muted, Councillor.
Thank you. My question is for CAO Closey. Are we tracking the number of staff that are vaccinated by department? I know that, you know, as Director Barry mentioned, we have staff that are truly essential and put personal safety at risk. Do we know what the percentage of staff have gotten vaccinations, and are we keeping track?
We aren't specifically keeping track of those who have gotten a vaccination, but if they have taken time off, they are recording those times. So I could not tell you how many had actually gotten a vaccination. We did review that issue quite significantly with our HR team, and it's really not much we can do with that information once we get it. Getting the vaccination is a voluntary, so we've taken the approach of encouraging to the greatest extent possible for staff to get that vaccination. But we stepped away from actually tracking their vaccinations.
Okay, interesting. It would be lovely to be able to celebrate that we're leading the vaccination charge, and but I can understand that there may be some privacy questions there. My other question is for Director Barry, and it's a bit related to what we approved in the consent item around pandemic parking and waterfronts, et cetera. But given the volume of work that is created by people gathering at the lakeside and the need for park patrol, is it your expectation that if you implement some of the temporary no parking, it'll reduce some of the pressures on the enforcement team as well?
Through you, Mr. Mayor, that is our hope. We did get good feedback when it was implemented last year. So it did seem like one of those options that implementing this year would just make good sense. We're augmenting that, of course, this year with the park officer program. So the park officers themselves, there'll be some stationary and some mobile, and they'll be focusing on those special provision areas. So it gives us something we didn't have last year and hopefully helps deal with those congregations and those traffic issues in the lakefront areas.
So thank you for that. I know that Councillor Giddings and I have a few streets that have asked if they would be included in perhaps a no parking order. And their concern is, again, just the ability. They know they can call enforcement and you'll get there as soon as you can, but by the time someone gets there, sometimes it's too late. So I guess we'll give you the names of those parks for your consideration. Thanks very much.
Thank you, Councillor. Councillor Robertson.
This is for Director Barry. It goes to time and the enforcement number. Is it run 24/7 so someone will respond to that?
Through you, Mr. Mayor, yes. The town number, the 905-845-6601, or that's the best way 24/7 to get hold of municipal enforcement. So there's always somebody answering that call.
I would say that, except for on the weekends, it wasn't feeling to residents like that was happening. And they felt in after hours, any time in the evening, if people are gathering at South Shell Park in larger numbers, they would call to report it, and they felt like there was no way to know that their call had ever reached anybody and that things had been taken care of. Because they said, even a half hour later, people were still in a huge group, and so I need a way for them to know that somebody has responded then.
Through you, Mr. Mayor, if they called that number, they should have spoken with the after hours call center, and they should have gotten an occurrence number from them, and that's trackable through the call center. Residents always have the ability to call the Halton Regional Police non-emergency telephone number, 905-825-4777, and ask for Oakville Dispatch, and they'll dispatch a bylaw enforcement officer as well. But for the most part, the town number should be effective, and if there's any issues that you want to provide me an email with any issues, I'll look into what happened.
Okay, and so the number that we had last year, the 905-825-4722, is that going still?
Through you, Mr. Mayor, that's the COVID line. I would try and direct, we're trying to get everybody to call the one number. There's a bunch of numbers out there. So I'm going to suggest call the town number. No matter what, that dispatches one of our officers.
Okay, thank you. That's good information to know.
Yeah, the other number, Councillor, was a police number that was temporarily rigged up, and the number that Mr. Barry gave you, or the public just now, is the number the police decided to prefer. And if you need more information on that, the new chair of the police is one of your colleagues, and you can check with him.
Good, thank you so much. In terms of May long weekend, I assume all non-parking signs will be up by the May long weekend, and the park patrol program will be going by then?
Through you, Mr. Mayor, yeah, we're certainly trying. After tonight's approval, I understand staff will be working feverishly to get the signs up, and the park patrol program will be operational by then.
Thank you so much.
Thank you, Councillor Robertson. I think maybe I should ask for a motion to receive the report, or reports. Councillor Lischina, thank you. Any objection? Seeing none, that's carried. Thank you, everybody. Now, with some pleasure, I turn our attention, I hope, to item 9.2, the 2020 financial results and surplus disposition. Our Deputy Treasurer and Director of Finance, Jonathan van der Heijden, is available to answer questions.
Good evening, everybody. I'm happy to take any questions that you might have at this point on the 2020 financial results and surplus disposition.
Councillor O'Meara.
Your Worship, if there are no questions, I'd be happy to move the item.
Thank you. If you'd throw in congratulations to staff on the outstanding performance, I'd like it even more.
Done and done.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much, Mr. van der Heijden, for making yourself available. Is there any objection to the motion? Seeing none, it's carried. Thank you very much, and well done to everyone. Now, we turn to our Community Energy Strategy Implementation Update. We have registered delegations. I think there are 4, and we have a presentation. And Council, I'm going to suggest that we have the presentation, then the delegations, and then questions from Council. Is that agreeable to everybody? And if it is, then Denise Ergen, who is our Research Policy Analyst, and Dorothy St. George, our Director of Economic Development, you have the Zoom.
Good evening, Mayor, Council, and members of the public who are watching this evening. I am going to be providing the update on the Community Energy Strategy implementation in its first year, but really from the town's perspective as one stakeholder in this implementation and as a member of the Oakville Energy Task Force. Next slide, please. Just over a year ago, Council unanimously endorsed the Oakville Energy Task Force's Community Energy Plan, now renamed as the Community Energy Strategy. And Council provided the task force $100,000 in 2020 as part of a 5-year commitment to support the development of an implementation management office that would be created to oversee the coordination and to champion the implementation of the strategy. The final strategy is available on oakville.ca and represents just one of the ways that the community is working with the town to address the climate emergency. Today, next slide, please. Today is the follow-up to that conversation. As directed by Council, today we are reporting on a comparative analysis conducted that was completed to address Council's request to align the strategy's 2041 GHG emission reduction goal with national and international targets. Other outstanding items from the resolution will be addressed in separate and future Council reports. We are also following up on some of the items that were part of the received report, specifically the financial and in-kind contributions from the town to the development of the Implementation Management Office. As I just mentioned, $100,000 was given in 2020 with the understanding future contributions over in that 5-year period would be formalized through a service agreement between the town and the organization. So I'm going to start the presentation with a review of the GHG alignment exercise. The strategy's greenhouse gas emission reduction goal, as a reminder, is to enable a transition to a goal of carbon neutrality by reducing greenhouse gas emissions by at least 50% below 2016 levels by 2041. The goal was developed collectively by the task force to acknowledge the need and the ambition to get to net zero greenhouse gas emissions while focusing on a target that serves with an energy efficiency and community economic goal and is based on actionable global best practice, proven technology, and that takes into account the current context of where Oakville is at. And next slide, please. I have to get into that practice. Not only was the request from council to align the greenhouse gas emissions reduction goal, but as a part of our participation in the Showcase City pilot program, which we were selected to be one of 25 municipalities to go through the program in 2020, we had to demonstrate that the strategy's goal was of equal ambition to the national target, which we achieved. And equal ambition to the national target at the time was to reduce greenhouse gas emissions by 30% below 2005 levels by 2030. This analysis was third-party validated and enabled us to successfully complete the Showcase Cities program and achieve the internationally recognized mitigation badge for the Global Covenant of Mayors program. Two important notes here. The national targets are changing. You may have heard last week the Prime Minister announced that the 2030 target will be changing from 30% to over 40% reduction in GHG emissions. And the second note is that there's no internationally adopted greenhouse gas emissions target per se. However, Canada has committed to the Paris Climate Agreement to limit global warming by 2 degrees Celsius. And the United Nations Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change's most recent recommendation is to reach net zero carbon emissions around 2050. Next slide, please. Along with this recognition that we have received through the Global Covenant of Mayors, the task force, Sheridan College, and the town have been widely recognized for our leadership and the innovation that we've brought to building community capacity for developing and implementing this strategy. Over the last year, we have been invited to speak regionally, nationally, and internationally, as is demonstrated by some of the icons here and on this slide about our community energy journey. The icons here, however, do not represent the many municipalities which have invited us to come and speak as they undergo their own climate action and community energy plans to talk about our experience so that they can learn and integrate some of our lessons learned into their work as well. Next slide, please. What's getting others' attention is that the strategy has a robust and actionable implementation approach. It recognizes that an energy transformation requires community to work together. Solutions must be coordinated with multiple stakeholders steering the wheel together from day one. The strategy supports building community capacity to do that and carves out a very specific role for the town so that we can focus on the areas where we have the authority and the capacity to make a difference. So the strategy is set up in 2 ways to do this. First, by developing the concept of this community governance model, which we call the Implementation Management Office. And the second is through a set of 12 priority projects to be implemented by multiple stakeholders by 2025 that have links to specific strategic objectives and identify delivery partners and milestones. although it should be noted that those milestones do not reflect the impacts of COVID, which was declared just 3 weeks after we brought this report to council, and it was declared a pandemic just 3 weeks afterwards. Next slide, please. Over the last year, the task force, with support of town staff, have been bringing the concept of the Implementation Management Office to life. To do this, the task force established a number of committees to pull together critical incorporation, operational, and governance elements to develop and jumpstart a community non-for-profit from scratch. The task force volunteered a significant amount of hours to contribute to completing this work. And it should be noted that many of them are in very senior positions at their organizations, and were also at the same time managing their own COVID response efforts and still making the time to do this work with us and each other as a priority. I'm happy to say that on January of this year, the IMO was officially incorporated as Future Energy Oakville Center, known as Future Energy Oakville, or FEO. To incorporate, 3 founding board of directors were selected, the minimum required to legally incorporate as a not-for-profit in Ontario, and those board of directors held their inaugural meeting in March. The FEO board is a skills-based board and is complemented by the ongoing role of the Oakville Energy Task Force, for which Councillor Longo has been appointed as a representative of council. The task force remains an advisory group that represents multiple sectors critical to Oakville's energy transformation. Next slide, please. As a member of the task force, the town has committed to help support the startup of Future Energy Oakville. Because so much work has been done and has been volunteer driven by the task force itself, only minor expenses, less than $5,000, were incurred in 2020 from the original contribution of $100,000. As part of council's commitment to support Future Energy Oakville, a 5-year period, another $100,000 was approved in the 2021 capital budget. With that, today we are bringing forward a service agreement to formalize the relationship between the town and Future Energy Oakville. The service agreement is only 14 months, as we thought it would be important to structure it around Future Energy Oakville's first year of operation, with many of the terms being unique to that, and future contributions would be subject to future service agreements to be brought forward to council. The key elements of the service agreement include that Future Energy Oakville onboard at least 1 staff member, make progress in its role to implement the strategy, develop a community presence, report back to council on progress, and includes town support of $200,000 financial contribution to date and administrative support to Future Energy Oakville as it continues to build capacity. Next slide, please. The complementary side of this that's happening in parallel are the implementation of the priority projects, where the town has offered to be a delivery partner based on identifying the specific roles it plays in community energy implementation. And these are documented as Appendix 1 in the community energy strategy. The first is a convener and facilitator, as we are uniquely positioned within the community to bring stakeholders together, a policymaker to enable local stakeholders and others to act in the transitioning energy market, a leader by example. So even though the town's municipal operations only account for less than 2% of the community's total energy use in 2016, our baseline, we still have an opportunity, and we still are very much showing corporate leadership on energy and greenhouse gas emission reductions. These first 3 are bolded on this slide because they represent direct links to the priority projects where we've said we will have a role. And the last 2, economic development supporter and promoting energy literacy and climate action, kind of foundational elements that support the delivery of all the priority projects in the strategy. Next slide, please. So over the next 3 slides, I'm going to highlight some of the town-led initiatives that have come up over the last year that support the strategy's priority project implementation. And it's really, really important to stress here that this is happening in parallel with Future Energy Oakville. We haven't been waiting for Future Energy Oakville to come on the scene and be established to get implementation of the strategy started. We actually hit the ground running right away. Here I've only included, I've included projects and initiatives that are being led by multiple departments outside of my climate action team. And I've only included those that have been previously reported on by council or have been previously put into the public sphere. And it would be also important to highlight that these projects are, while the town has been significantly investing in them, they're also attracting large investments by external stakeholders as well. These are only town-led projects. The community is working on some priority projects, but it will be for the Future Energy Oakville to compile that information and report back to the community in the future. This is specifically town-led projects. Next slide, please. So the first one is really captured under our role as a convener and a facilitator. In August 2020, Council endorsed a collaboration between ourselves and Oakville Enterprises Corporation to submit a application for a grant to conduct a residential retrofit business case feasibility study. In January 2021, Council endorsed a collaboration with the Consulate of Denmark in Toronto to complete district energy studies, among other things, that are being designed to draw community stakeholders to the table and to continue on with the strategy's priority projects. Next slide, please. The district energy feasibility studies also support our role as a policymaker by fleshing out what we need to do at the town to help support from a policy perspective, support large-scale district energy deployment. And another aspect of how we've demonstrated, acted in the role as a policymaker is Council received an update in November 2020 on urban mobility and our transportation strategy, and that included a greenhouse gas emission lens from the community energy strategy. Next slide, please. The last bucket here is the town leading by example. Efforts to implement the 2020 Energy Conservation and Demand Management Plan, which is our corporate plan and how we increase our energy efficiency and reduce greenhouse gas emissions. These are largely underway, with greenhouse gas emission reduction of corporate facilities being ahead of schedule to meeting our 2024 target. This has been a result of lighting retrofits, energy conservation projects, retro commissioning at various facilities, and overall increase in staff engagement on energy management initiatives. In the summer of 2020, two significant announcements were made on how the town is leading by example to electrify our transportation sector. The first is the collaboration with the province of Ontario and Government of Canada to begin the transition and expansion of Oakville's local public transit fleet with fully battery electric buses. And the second is a collaboration with NRCan to install 46 public electric vehicle charging stations across the community by December 2021. Currently, 14 of those EV charging stations are installed and operational, available to use by the community. Next slide, please. Those are the highlights of the work being done on the community energy projects by the town. But that represents only one part of the larger climate action portfolio and how the town is addressing the climate emergency. My colleagues in the climate action team and corporate strategy team as well will be reporting back to council in early summer in alignment with the second anniversary of Oakville's climate emergency to provide a more broad overview of climate action work underway at the town. Next slide, please. And I will end my presentation here with the recommendations of the report. Thank you very much. I'm happy to answer and address any comments or questions. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Ms. Ergen. Let's see, I have an electronic hand showing from Councillor Haslett-Thiel.
Thank you, Mayor Burton, and thank you for such a comprehensive report. I just have one point of clarification. So in terms of division of responsibility or between Future Energy and the town of Oakville, who would pursue things like a net zero accelerator grant or funding for things like midtown residential development? Is that something the town can take a role in, or is that something you see the Future Energy taking a role in?
So the way that, at least conceptually, Future Energy Oakville is set up in its mandate, Future Energy Oakville would be the one bringing the town to the table in that conversation as one stakeholder. They would also be bringing the developers, the region, the grantors, other investors to the conversation as well, to make sure that all those individual stakeholders were there collaborating with each other to make sure that this grant was successfully submitted and the project work was successfully completed in time.
So thank you for that. So for clarity, is the expertise in grant writing rest more with us or with how they're going to staff Future Energy Oakville?
I think that would be something we'd have to clarify, and it might be on a project by project basis. So some of these large cross-sector projects might rest with Future Energy Oakville. You know, they do have plans to hire a specific staff member with grant writing experience and have that expertise. But our staff is also pursuing different grants as they come up as well in parallel to that. So I think we would have to take that as on a project by project basis.
It certainly would be exciting to see us be able to achieve some funding for Midtown in that regard. So thank you for some of that clarification.
Thank you.
Councillor Longo.
Thank you, Your Worship. Not sure if this would be the time for me to make some comments, or should I wait till after delegations?
Well, it depends on whether you want to wait for more information before you offer a comment, or maybe you have a comment that doesn't need further information. It's totally up to you. You have the Zoom. Okay, thank you. So yeah, I just wanted to thank yourself, Mayor Burton, and Town Council for continuing to support the town's involvement in the Oakville Energy Task Force. I have to say it's amazing how Future Energy Oakville has now been established. I mean, it's been a journey, but I think it's just realizing the vision and a community-driven solutions. I'm just really happy to see that it's now incorporated. We've got an initial board of directors. I think that's fantastic news, and I look forward to the projects that are going to happen. I also wanted to indicate that I'm supportive of the agreement between the town and FEO. So I know that's part of the motion. So we'll leave that to voting, but I do support it. But I also wanted to acknowledge the hard work of the town staff. So Denise and Dorothy and Donna for their support in moving this forward. But also the members of the Oakville Energy Task Force and the tremendous amount of work and the committee work just to get the Future Energy Oakville off the ground. So I'm really optimistic about this. I really am supportive of this, and I'm honored to be representing council on the Oakville Energy Task Force. So I really support this, and thanks for the efforts. Thank you, Councillor Longo. Council, shall we turn our attention to our delegations now? I think that's what you'd like. So I miscounted. We have 5. We'll lead off with Mervyn Russell from Halton Action for Climate Emergency Now. Mr. Russell, council looks forward to your information, and you have the Zoom. Mr. Russell, are you with us? Council, while we wait for Mr. Russell to get connected, I'll just give you.
I'll start again, Mayor.
There you go. We can hear you now. And just before you.
Microphone, and I unmuted it, but apparently that didn't bring me into the meeting. Okay.
Welcome.
Mayor Benton and councillors, my name is Mervyn Russell, as the mayor has indicated, and I'm speaking on behalf of the Halton Action for Climate Emergency Now, Hasten, with the additional endorsement of Grandmothers Act to Save the Planet. I was an observer of the Oakville Energy Force Task meeting on April 19th, and I came away from the meeting with two impressions. The first was that the meeting was very self-congratulatory, which was probably very much deserved. The second was how far this project is still from taking action on the issue for which it was set up, namely the climate emergency. Hasten was always doubtful about the potential of this project with its particular structure to respond rapidly to the climate emergency. The structure of what is now called Future Energy Oakville seemed heavy on designated management and light on assured funding, and it seems our doubts have been confirmed. In following through on its climate emergency resolution, the municipality deliberately freed itself of directly reducing community energy use. Council decided that outside of its internal corporate responsibilities, those reductions would have to be brought about by community involvement, effort, and majority financing. Council therefore set up a public-private partnership where most of the heavy lifting would be done by the private partner. However, unlike a business P3, this partnership would not be driven by profitability for the private partner, but community well-being. Nor would the private involvement be taken forward by accountable work of employees, but by volunteers. The development of the project can be understood as going through three main phases. The first is the setting up of the initial corporation with 3 founding directors. This task has been carried out by a volunteer group, Oakville Energy Task Force, consisting of 18 people from different and complementary social sectors. The second phase consists of the initiated corporation called Future Energy Oakville, who are to complete the selection of its directors, gain the financial support needed for the corporation to do its work, and to appoint an executive director. Phase 3 is the board and the executive director mandating and appointing the community-based priority project task forces and then supervising their work of gaining community involvement in reducing the use of energy and the production of carbon emissions. Faced with the climate emergency, after 1.5 years, during most of which there has been a COVID-19 pandemic, Phase 1 was completed on Monday, April the 19th. Phase 2 begins with 3 founding directors. They have objectives which will be more difficult to achieve than those of Phase 1. They include the appointing of the board of directors, securing sufficient funding, appointing an executive director, all of which are crucial for the success of the project. Despite the presence of a number of corporate representatives on the CETF, only the 2 founding organizations, the town itself and Sheridan College, have so far made commitments towards reaching the approximately $1.25 million per year as laid out in the budget of the Community Energy Strategy. A search for an executive director will not begin until there is money for that person's salary. Businesses are not likely to commit significant funding until there is an executive director whose ability they can assess. How much can 3 directors achieve, even with a continuing support from town staff? How long, therefore, will it take to get Phase 3 up and running? Remembering that Phase 3 is the whole reason for the project in the first place. With no paid staff in place, no work has begun on the community-focused priority projects. Clearly, the interim targets for these priority projects cannot be met. The priority projects for which the town has responsibility are, however, underway and in some cases ahead of schedule. The only exception is the retrofit program, which the town has directed is to be developed by Oakville Enterprise Corporation. Hasten has person-to-person conversations about this project with the OEC management and discovered that at the point of time of our meeting, little headway had been made on even developing a proposal to be put to the Canadian Municipalities Association for a grant to carry out a feasibility study. We should not blame the slowness of the implementation of the community energy strategy on those who've been active in the OETF, and particularly not on the excellent Denise Ergen, who seems to have been acting in the position of a pro tem executive director. It seems to hasten that it is the structure of the project that is the problem. Municipalities in which significant, rapid progress has been made in responding to the climate emergency, such as Vancouver, Calgary, Montreal, are municipalities where the municipality itself has taken the primary responsibility for organizing, staffing, and financing an overall response. Of course, Oakville is much smaller than the cities I've mentioned. However, the implementation of the parts of the community energy strategy for which the town has responsibility has moved ahead, presumably because the town has in place the organization, staff, and finances to be effective. Maybe if the town had also had responsibility for the community-focused parts of the strategy, more progress would have been made. For that to happen, however, the town of Oakville will need to have had the resources to carry the whole project, and probably it doesn't, which makes Hasten wonder if this initiative should have been, and perhaps still should be, a regional project, like I understand is the case for the proposed project of the region of Peel. It is Hasten's view that the project that is now called Future Energy Oakville needs help. It needs the OETF not only to oversee the work of the FEO, but to continue to actively assist the three founding directors to recruit the remaining directors, the executive director, and to access funding. The town needs urgently to guarantee the executive director's salary for 2 years so that as soon as possible, there can be a full-time expert person carrying forward the objectives of the board and thinking through the needs and means associated with each priority project. If the town wants the FEO to continue going forward as an exclusively Oakville project, it needs to be ready to increase its overall ongoing financial support. Such funding from the initiator of the project will indicate to businesses that the town takes the project seriously and will encourage them to do the same. The town needs to become more involved in promoting its community energy strategy. It needs to develop ways of publicizing Future Energy Oakville, its achievements in implementing the community energy strategy, and requiring quarterly reports to the council directly from Future Energy Oakville. Both the community energy strategy and Future Energy Oakville, by the way, are not mentioned, as far as I can see, anywhere by name on the town's environment page, and are therefore consequently difficult to find. Hasten has no pleasure in giving what is a rather negative assessment on the progress of the community energy strategy. Urgency is the motivation. Maybe it's too late to change the fundamental structure of Future Energy Oakville. Surely it can be tweaked. It needs to be if its prospects for success are to be improved, and success is what we all want and what we will all strive for. Thank you for listening. And our website, by the way, is HACEN.info. Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Thank you very much for your information. Are there questions for the delegation? Thank you, Mr. Russell. Madam Clerk, would you call the next delegation?
Next,
Ms. Aki Tanaka?
right. Next delegation is Aki Tanaka.
Ms. Tanaka, welcome. Council looks forward to your information. And Council, I'll just mention that there are 6 delegations in total now.
Okay.
Welcome.
Okay.
We can hear you very well.
Okay, thank you very much. Okay, Mayor Burton and Town Council. My name is Aki Tanaka. I'm a retired engineer and I live in Ward 2. I've been following the work of the Oakville Energy Task Force since its inception by attending all the public sessions. I congratulate all those involved in the implementation of the community energy strategy. I truly appreciate that this strategy acknowledges the scale at which transformation must take place in order for Oakville to reach significant greenhouse gas emission reduction. It's impressive to see that Future Energy Oakville, or the FEO, is incorporated with 3 well-qualified directors. FEO bylaws and governance are in place. Director and officer insurance from the Ontario Nonprofit Network is in place. The relationship between the task force and Future Energy Oakville is defined. There's a recommended process for hiring an executive director. The town has secured money from the provincial and federal governments for electric buses and from Natural Resources Canada for electric vehicle charging stations. And the town has secured money from the Consulate of Denmark in Toronto for district energy studies. Please consider my ideas for pushing this project forward. Put concerted effort towards obtaining funding, whether that be from businesses, government grants, foundations, or the public. An executive director needs to be hired to make progress. I urge the businesses who worked on the task force to step up and commit funds. They are aware of its potential to bring about an energy transformation and stand to benefit from the projects undertaken. The good work and progress on implementing the community energy strategy must reach the residents of Oakville. There is a reason that I seem to be the only resident outside of those that are associated with the task force that is openly supporting your work. So few people know about it. In fact, by keeping information on the implementation to the task force and working group, you are alienating the very people that would support you. We are consumed in dealing with life with COVID, but when there's an important idea or issue, people will become engaged. Witness the effort that has been put in recently by the public in Ontario to learn about the complicated topic of land use planning and sprawl, and the resultant delegations at municipal and regional councils. Please tell Oakvillians about your good work in easy to understand language and format, that they may become engaged and offer their support. In addition to these suggestions to move the community energy strategy forward, I ask that the town consider other ways of reducing greenhouse gas emissions that were not in the scope of the CES. This would be actions like reducing food waste and implementing nature-based solutions to sequester carbon and foster biodiversity. Work in these areas can go on in parallel with the CES. A note about my fellow delegators, Mervyn and Hart and I all talk together and we all want the same thing, to get on with the business of reducing greenhouse gas emissions in Oakville. COVID has shown us that we can mobilize in the face of an existential threat. Let's do the same for the climate crisis, which is more complex, more pervasive, and for which there will be no vaccine. Thank you for listening and all the work that you are doing in Oakville.
Thank you very much for your information. Questions, Council? Thank you, Mr. Tanaka. Madam Clerk, would you bring in next delegation, Hart Jansen?
Thank you.
Welcome,
Thank you, Mayor
Mr.
Burton.
Jansen. We can hear you very well. Thank you. We look forward to your information.
Thank you, Mayor Burton. and good evening, councillors, staff, and fellow taxpayers. Next slide, please. Recent events have reinforced the conclusion of the Ipcc report recommendations to achieve 50% emission reductions by 2030. At the same time, emissions in Canada and in Halton have been rising. Yet international and national commitments to larger emission reductions abound. We have federal grants specifically for residential retrofits available as of this summer. In addition, we have technology available installed at multiple homes in Halton that is cost effectively lowering emissions with data to back that up. My presentation today focuses on residential retrofits, but it is part of a bigger picture. Next slide, please. Context is important. In Canada, we are among the most profligate emitters on the planet, and federally, we have not met a single climate target that we have committed to. In Oakville, on a statistical basis, we emit even more than the Canadian average with our larger houses, multiple cars, and higher consumption levels. We emit at least 10 times more than called for by the Paris Accord, as outlined in a Sheridan video presented to the OETF. If we are to do our part in averting both a natural and an economic catastrophe, we must improve our targets and speed up our execution. Next slide, please. Let's not forget that the community energy strategy deals with only 40% of the emissions that we produce, or about 6.6 tons of carbon per year per person, out of the 15 or 20 that we emit. This graphic is borrowed from a pamphlet produced by Diane Sachs, and the Oakville Community Energy Strategy deals only with gasoline use, the driving wedge, natural gas, the home heating wedge, and electricity use, which is the yellow sliver on top of the right-hand column. The other 60% of emissions are due to flying, construction and manufacturing activities, food, services, and stuff that we buy. We can't forget this majority of the emissions released. How is Oakville addressing this forgotten 60%? Next slide, please. I do want to point out, as Aki has clearly done, that the OETF and town staff have really done an incredible job, and thousands of hours of work, many as volunteers. And Oakville's corporate energy strategy is great, and the accomplishments have been wonderful to date. But the big payback, because 98% of the emissions are in the community, is in community emissions reduction. So I suggest we need to augment our current community energy strategy with additional cost-effective approaches. Next slide, please. Why do we need a more aggressive plan? If we improve our targets and implement programs more quickly, we could achieve an emissions reduction profile that looks something like this, with about 80% emissions reduction by 2040. Granted, the earlier years would likely see more gradual reductions, but this is meant to illustrate an important point. Next slide, please. Namely, that we are missing an opportunity to reduce emissions. The red line shows an approximation of the current community energy strategy overseen by the FEO, which aims to achieve about 50% reduction by 2041. The difference in approach is the potential of millions of tons of extra emissions being released. These emissions can never be recovered and will remain in the atmosphere for 100 years and more. Next slide, please. For the residential retrofit priority project, important initial milestones have already been missed, and no revised schedule or strategy is apparent. We can see an example of immediate action in Halton Hills with their retrofit pilot program. we can take urgent supplemental action until such time as the FEO is active and capable, and until a private sector or nonprofit partner has been identified and they're active in implementing retrofits on a larger scale. Let's keep in mind that the federal grants and loans for residential retrofits are time-bound and limited. Let's make sure Oakville residents get their fair share. Next slide, please. I attended a meeting with the Oakville Enterprises Corporation and a couple of private sector companies. And that was attended by OEC's Chief Operating Officer, Scott Moody. And attached to my delegation are the minutes of that meeting and a related letter that I sent to most of the councillors and staff, and I apologize to those on council who did not receive that originally. And that outlined the retrofit project situation and slow progress. Now, again, I'm addressing just one of the 12 priority projects. I invite others to consider additional emergency appropriate approaches to the other priority projects. The phase one retrofit program that I'm suggesting is like dousing a house fire rather than letting it burn. There may be some smoldering left, but the house is left standing and the immediate danger is averted. The mechanics of this phase one augmentation program involves replacing the air conditioning unit with a heat pump to cut 50% to 70% of emissions. Costs about $8,000 depending on the size of the house, and is cash positive with private financing even without the federal grants and loans. Spreadsheets and real-life data to back this up are available. Phase two could include a deeper retrofit that would see removal of the gas furnace and replacement with a larger heat pump. This presumably would be covered by the larger follow-on FEO program. Next slide, please. So I'm recommending that in parallel with the ongoing FEO efforts, that the town of Oakville could fund the administration and promotion of a pilot program in cooperation with capable private sector companies to start later in 2021, with the actual costs of the retrofits to be financed by federal grants and loans and private loans with no cost to the town. The saved emissions assume a 50% reduction in emissions and go to the end of 2026. The $400,000 cost figure I show here is a swag. Might be lower, it might be higher, but useful for illustration. Alton region has the objective of reducing greenhouse gas emissions in the region. Burlington has very similar objectives for retrofits in its climate action plan, so there may be an opportunity to share common costs. Next slide, please. These questions, these are the key strategic questions which I have not seen answers to in the community energy strategy. How much should Oakville be investing in the community energy strategy? Should it be based on emissions reduction impact per dollar? If so, would a greater investment in the community energy strategy give a good economic return? The tax-paying public deserves to know what these spending decisions are based on and the expected impacts. These questions apply to all priority projects and to the corporate energy initiatives. I request that council consider asking staff to provide a report that answers these questions and provides the background data. Taxpayers need to know. Next slide, please. So there's no denying the gravity and immediacy of the COVID pandemic. There's also no denying the magnitude and severity of climate change. Now, what does climate change mean? Not just species loss or forced migration of millions of people and extreme weather events. According to the chief economist of Swiss Re, a multinational reinsurance company that just completed a multifaceted study of economic effects of climate change on 48 countries. It will likely mean a 7% loss of GDP in Canada in 30 years. That is $140 billion of lost economic activity that will hit Canada hard and will hit Oakville hard. So not just as an environmentalist and a grandparent, but as an investor and a capitalist, I ask that we augment our climate action plans to be more aggressive. The Swiss Re chief economist says, climate change is the #1 risk, no question about it. In a global economic context, he says, climate change is the #1 risk, no question about it. Here in Oakville, we need large, near-term, and permanent emission reductions. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Jansen, for your information. Are there questions for the gentleman? Thank you, Mr. Jansen. Madam Clerk, would you bring in the next delegation, Cindy Toth from the Halton Environmental Network, popularly known as HEN, I believe. There you are.
Hi.
And we can hear you. Welcome. Council looks forward to your information.
Excellent. Thank you, Mayor Burton and Council, for your attention this evening. My name is Cindy Toth, and I am the Halton Environmental Network Vice Chair of the Board. The report on implementation of Oakville's community energy strategy outlines the work of the Oakville Energy Task Force and the setup of the implementing body, Future Energy Oakville. Importantly, Council is also hearing an update on the significant ongoing municipal initiatives that are advancing implementation of the strategy, and congratulates the town on its successful completion of the mitigation badge and on continuing to move forward significant initiatives long important by bringing in electric buses, electric vehicle charging stations, district energy, and much more as represented in the staff report. HEN is here tonight to support continuing the work of the task force and establishment of the FEO, and to let you know about some of the projects HEN has underway that directly connect to how we as community partners are supporting this strategy. HEN's Executive Director, Lisa Kohler, has been a key and active participant in the task force from the beginning, attending meetings, organizing communications with the public, and working with town staff, other task force members, and consultants to arrive at one of the most innovative and ambitious plans out there. Both Lisa and I contributed through task force subcommittee meetings on next steps to make sure that the strategy was set up with appropriate governance, policies, and structure to support sustainable implementation in the long term. While the efforts have been fairly intense, and at times at all times has been very rewarding to work with a collective of people supported by exemplary town staff. The governance structure being established sets up Oakville as an innovative and can be expected to deliver community-driven results. This work has been community-driven and town-supported. The solution to a community's carbon neutrality lies not only through the municipal tax dollar, but through community investment in achieving that common future. Of course, the town's participation and role as a champion are essential to ensure continued coordination and strategic progress. Critically important components include council and staff's commitment and seed and maintenance funding that has been and will be required to demonstrate leadership and confidence in the FEO. The success of a governance body established to oversee implementation of a community plan is integrally linked to setting the foundations of the organization broadly and stably across a community. Other community energy plans have not gone far into implementation due to the expectations that a municipality should do all the administration, funding, and implementation. These plans are languishing on shelves not because they aren't good, but because there were expectations for the municipality to do it all. That is unreasonable and short-sighted, and to think that implementation solution is simple or easy is incorrect. That is why HEN supports the task force and establishing the FEO. HEN remains committed to working with the town and Halton community on efforts that align with the strategy. Actions by community partners, institutions, businesses, residents, and not-for-profit groups are and will be integral to the success of the strategy. Currently, HEN has over 20 initiatives underway, ranging from developing food gardens, a food forest, improving energy and climate literacy, supporting community resiliency through Oakville Ready, assessing residential readiness for greening homes and transportation, and more. A few of HEN's key projects are particularly aligned and have potential to inform and help implement some of the strategy recommendations. The strategy defined the residential and transportation sectors as using the most energy and contributing the most GHGs. In the 2016 baseline, the residential sector use represented 33% and 27% of the GHGs. Transportation was responsible for 29% of the energy use and 48% of the GHGs. This makes actions to reduce these contributions all important as timely next steps. Last fall, HEN was the only community organization federally funded via the Oakville Community Foundation to carry out an investment readiness program. This feasibility study for the study area of Halton, currently wrapping up, is investigating the potential to advance deep energy retrofits through the development of a social purpose organization. We are grateful to the many local institutions, businesses, utilities, residents, and community groups that participated in the stakeholder interviews to inform the process, as well as the 400 residents that completed a survey to help HEN understand the pulse of the community to inform the market-driven side of the process. 95% of respondents were homeowners. 97% indicated their family has or would be willing to consider some personal lifestyle changes. Input was received on decision-making on energy-saving renovations or upgrades. Results indicate that motivation exists for residents to take climate action and save money on energy retrofits. HEN has learned a lot through the project and is excited to share our findings when all the information is collated and that final report is completed in May. We are hopeful that the information we've collected can be used for multiple purposes. The results of this assessment will be valuable to help inform actions to move deep energy retrofits into a sustainable program for the residential sector over the long term. This aligns directly with the first strategic objective in the strategy to increase energy efficiency of existing homes and achieve a 30% residential sector efficiency gain by retrofitting 80% of existing homes. A potential opportunity, as Hart mentioned, may exist within the new federal budget, proposing $40,000 interest-free loans to homeowners to advance deep energy retrofits. HEN, as a community partner focused exclusively on local community-based climate action, would want to help get these loans into the hands of homeowners. We want to work with other local partners to rapidly scale up home energy efficiency uptake within our community. As a complementary effort, HEN is working with Halton Hales, supporting their retrofit pilot program, focusing on their residential sector, which at 22% is their second largest source of their town's greenhouse gas emissions. The project is evaluating the feasibility of a local improvement charge-based home energy retrofit program targeting the residential sector. To enable cross-regional collaboration, HEN continues as the backbone agency of the Halton Climate Collective. The HCC, convened in mid-2017, involves local organizations, municipalities, institutions, school boards, focused on collectively transforming Halton into a low-carbon, climate-resilient community. Going into its 5th year, thousands of voices have been heard through engagement. Conversations within the community on climate resiliency, community and individual action, and the power of collective impact have elevated and advanced progress towards environmental sustainability. Involving youth is critically important to ensure that youth actions drive sustainability into the future. HEN and the HCC has again organized Generation Green Youth Unconference, organized by Youth for Youth, as a way to inspire students, many from Oakville, to take actions to reduce their greenhouse gas emissions, conserve energy, and reduce waste and live more sustainably. Last year's event involved over 200 students and produced 46 projects with an impact of 20.6 tons of GHGE reduction. This year's event, partnered with the Halton District School Board, involved over 500 students in the March 10th launch event and follow-up, and 200 students are carrying out projects as we speak. The wrap-up event is being held in mid-May, so stay tuned to hear about the cumulative impact of our youth's 2021 Generation Green effort. Now HEN is beginning a new journey, working with Halton Region to take the development of the region's climate action into the community, based on the HCC approach and working to build on and leverage the ongoing work of municipalities. All of these efforts engage and elevate community conversations around climate resiliency and drive actions and successful outcomes in line with the strategy. We are pleased to be here tonight to report on our aligned projects and support the staff recommendation. It will be important for the town to stay the course, maintain commitment to the task force and FEO, to continue efforts on corporate sustainability and climate initiative, and work with community partners towards common goals. HEN remains committed to working with the town, task force, and FEO to achieve the goals of Oakville's community energy strategy. Thanks for listening.
Thank you very much for your information. Are there questions for the delegate? Thank you very much, Ms. Toth. Madam Clerk, would you please bring in the next delegation, Harry Shea, the co-chair of the Oakville Energy Task Force? Mr. Shea. Madam Clerk, do you have him?
I believe I'm unmuted. For some reason, my camera is not displaying, but
well,
we'll start my
luckily we
video.
can hear you, so that's a start. And now we can see you.
Excellent. Thank you,
Welcome. Sir. Council looks forward to your information.
Good evening, Mayor Burton and members of Town Council. My name is Harry Shea, and I'm here as the co-chair of the Oakville Energy Task Force. I'm very pleased to replace John Mathieson, who you'll be hearing from later. The other co-chair, Michelle McCollum, has graciously accepted to stay on this coming year, mentoring me in my new role. Michelle sends her regrets for not being here tonight, as she is spending time on a vacation with her husband, celebrating his birthday and their 25th wedding anniversary. The task force recognized early on that failure was not going to be an option, and that for Oakville to truly deliver a transformational change in its energy future, it required two essential elements. One, an independent, not-for-profit organization was required, and second, a fundamental understanding for the need to deliver this transformational change at both scale and speed, which required an independent organization to accomplish these objectives. Hundreds of other towns and cities have developed well-written community energy plans, but regardless of how enthusiastic or well-meaning at the start, their lack of success seemed to always come back to one key element, and that was the lack of an accountable, independent organization driving the change in their community. The FEO is no different than any other startup, as it requires the talent in filling the organizational chart that John will be describing later, as well as the necessary seed capital to do so. Without the rapid and appropriate resources, the FEO can truly fulfill its ambitious and game-changing role. Now, with the community energy strategy in place, the FEO established, and the initial board of directors named, the task force can now pivot to its new role. First, it's one of accountability, ensuring that the FEO fulfills its mandate. Second is the continuing role to attract sponsorship, which the task force is actively engaged in and will continue to do so in the future. And third is external communication. With the FEO launched, the task force recognizes achieving success requires the continued engagement, support, and commitment of the community as we continue to build capacity by engaging others. The task force represents a broad cross-section of the community, and these different perspectives have been represented in our work to date. In the coming weeks, the task force will have a more visible presence within the community. In conclusion, I want to thank the Town Council for their support to date and their continued support in the future as our work has just begun. I also want to take this time to thank my fellow task force members who last year volunteered hundreds of hours along with their expertise, getting us to the point that we are today. The task force remains committed to Oakville's energy future, and through Oakville's success, to be a role model for Canada's energy future. This concludes my remarks, and I thank you for your time.
Thank you very much, Mr. Shea, for not only the volunteer hours that you yourself put in, and your information tonight, but through you to the rest of the task force. Council, do you have questions for the delegation? Thank you, Mr. Shea. Madam Clerk, would you bring in the sixth and last delegation, the Future Energy Oakville Board of Directors, Zahir Mohammed, Wayne Steffler, and John Matheson. Welcome, Mr. Matheson. As the rest of here's Mr. Steffler, and we just need Mr.
Hello.
Mohammed now.
Hopefully you can hear me okay.
For all I know, he's on the screen too. Here he is. Welcome, Mr. Mohammed. And I don't know how you guys are going to split this up among yourselves, but you have the Zoom, so unmute yourselves and use the Zoom.
Thank you very much. Hopefully you can hear me okay. Appreciate the nods. Great. Honorable Mayor, members of council, colleagues, and members of the public. Good evening. A little over a year ago, I was in front of this council presenting the highlights of the community energy strategy developed by the Oakville Energy Task Force. And at that time, I was one of the co-chairs, along with my colleague, Michelle McCullum, of the Oakville Energy Task Force. We were expectantly awaiting the council's endorsement of the community energy strategy and your initial support to launch what at the time we had called the Implementation Management Office. Today, I am here before you as one of the 3 nominated founding board members of that realized embodiment of the Implementation Management Office. The Future Energy Oakville Center, or FEO, was launched earlier this year as a not-for-profit entity, with its primary purpose to ensure the implementation of the strategy that will see Oakville's greenhouse gas emissions set on a path to achieve the Paris Accord targets, and billions of dollars of investment returned to this city that would otherwise have left it. I'm joined today by my founding co-board members, Wayne Steffler, our acting treasurer, whose day job is the Vice President of Finance and Administration at Sheridan College, and Zahir Mohammed, our acting board secretary, whose day job is the Director of Strategic Business Development and head of the MindSphere Application Center at Siemens Canada. My name is John Mattison, and during our first FEO board meeting in late March, I was elected president and chair of the FEO. I'm sure I speak for all my co-founding board members when I say that just being nominated to these positions has been both an honor and we acknowledge a huge responsibility. We would like to thank the town's ongoing support to the task force over the past few years as the strategy was being developed, and especially Councillor Longo, whose continued presence on the task force has both benefited the development of the strategy and streamlined our communications with Town Council. This ongoing support will be especially vital to the success of future Energy Oakville, especially in these early first couple of years as we accomplish our first few goals. Since the establishment of the FEO, we have reached an agreement with the town on a services agreement, which has been presented to you by the Economic Development and Corporate Strategy Department in the minutes in advance of this meeting. Future Energy Oakville supports the Community Energy Strategy Implementation Update as presented and recommends the same endorsements, authorizations, and implementations as described by Denise Ergen earlier. As the FEO moves past the initial establishment and administrative setup of this not-for-profit, in addition to supporting the various activities described in that update, we have been turning to 3 key priorities. The first is recruiting the staff that will focus on this organization's successful full-time. The executive director, community communications manager, and the priority project program managers will be required to ensure the step change transition required to bring Oakville to its net zero targets. While finding the right executive director for the FEO is obviously a very important task, I don't want to underestimate the critical importance of an experienced communications and stakeholder engagement manager that will connect with all stakeholders to implement a robust and strategic engagement with the public. In order to hire these key resources, we are also focusing on our second near-term priority of fundraising, and we'll be looking for continued support of top officials in the town in making connections with influential community organizations and individuals. We have already started reaching out to a number of corporations with prominent offices in Oakville and welcome anyone listening to reach out if they represent a company willing to financially support the FEO. We also have been in contact with a number of experts in the not-for-profit advancement community looking for tips, guidance, and best practices in fundraising for not-for-profits. And we are in early stages of discussions with organizations that professionally raise funds for not-for-profit as their normal course of business. We're also very proud of the work that the Oakville Energy Task Force has delivered to create Future Energy Oakville. We are pleased that the task force wants to stay connected to the community energy strategy's delivery through their pivot from creating the strategy to an advisory body, continuing to represent the community and advising both the board and the eventual executive director. Members of the task force are already coming forward with various fundraising ideas, and we thank them. To be successful, both the community and public at large have an important role in achieving our goals, and we look forward to engaging with them further once the organization is staffed up and running. In addition to the community support, and while in front of Town Council this evening, we're also looking for the various arms of the town to also continue their support, be it Oakville Enterprises Corporation, which is building on the great work that they have already contributed, Oakville Transit, the various planning, operations, and engineering departments of the town, and of course, this council. The third short-term priority is expanding the board of directors of Future Energy Oakville. Last summer, a subcommittee from the Oakville Energy Task Force, and with inputs from other not-for-profit experienced board members, governance advisors, and diversity and inclusion specialists, developed a skills matrix summarizing all of the applicable skills that the FEO board members should have taken together. And we will defer to that skills matrix to fill the gaps on the board as we grow. In closing, I'd like to thank each member of this council once again for their ongoing support. Now that all the hard work of creating Future Energy Oakville has been completed, our purpose in being here today is to continue rallying the community for support. This innovative implementation model that is the FEO can only be successful if it is community supported and through a community-driven initiative. Only together can we achieve the economic growth that the community energy strategy is structured to provide. Only together can we achieve the greenhouse gas reduction targets envisioned. And together we can make Oakville the most livable town in Canada. Thank you for your time.
Thank you very much for your time and your information. I'd like to lead off Council's remarks and questions, if any, by expressing how grateful I am to the Oakville Energy Task Force, the Future Energy Oakville Board, and our staff for the way you recognized 3 key points. Number 1, where our lane is. Number 2, our community's expectations of us for quality of work. And number 3, what is the best path forward? The first thing you recognized, what is our lane, is that we are not alone. We are one of 4 layers of government. The higher layers of government have higher powers. Oakville is working on what we have the tools for, and as one of my heroes, the action-oriented president from the early 1900s, Theodore Roosevelt, who was famous for getting a lot done, he said this: start where you are, do what you can with what you have. And that is a great motto to achieve anything, and that's the spirit with which you, ladies and gentlemen, worked, and that's the spirit I'm trying to salute here. And we are seeing the higher layers of government moving in their jurisdiction areas, and that means that not only would it do no good to ask us to do their job, they are already beginning to do a better job of their job. So that's first. Second, Oakville residents want action based on better numbers than swag guesses. That's why we have and will have growing public buy-in. And without that growing public buy-in, we will get nowhere, because most emissions are from the individual actions that we choose as homeowners and renters and automobile drivers and buyers. And the third thing, the best path forward that you identified and that you, Mr. Mattison, I think concluded so well on, and that is the old saying, if you want to go fast, go alone, but if you want to go far, you have to go together. And that community engagement and that community buy-in is the magic sauce without which nothing's going to happen. We simply don't have the dictatorial powers to order people. Until we all want to do it, it isn't going to happen. Council, do you have questions for the board? All right, thank you very much, board members. And we will now turn to the report before us. Council, do you have questions for staff about the report in front of you? Or comments? They're also in order. Absent comments, a motion's in order. Councillor Longo. Councillor Longo, as the mover, you might want to say a word, I'm thinking.
Yeah, no, I think just to reiterate what I'd mentioned before, and thank you, John, for those great words as the founding board of the FEO. I do support the motion, and hopefully council will as well. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Longo. Is there any objection to the motion? Madam Clerk, seeing no objection, the motion's carried unanimously. With council's permission, would you record it as a recorded vote? In other words, we're all present, just list all the names in favor of it. Thank you very much. Council, we now, we still have an action-packed agenda. I'm just conscious that it's 9:15. So the next item is the Digital Oakville 2021 plan, and a look at the future after that. And we have a presentation from Julie Clark. and she is approaching the podium now. And Ms. Clark, you have the Zoom.
Use this one? Okay. Maybe both. Maybe both? Okay. Good evening, everyone. I am pleased tonight to be able to present to you the Digital Oakville 2021 plan. Before I get into the details of it, though, I would like to set some context. Could you go to the... We have been laying the groundwork for quite some time in preparation for the significant changes that are coming our way in digital transformation. And we do have a very solid foundation on which to build. Our approach can be described as planned and thoughtful, and it respects Council's commitment to limit budget increases to the rate of inflation. The opportunities facing us are wide-ranging, and all municipalities are contemplating how the next digital revolution will impact our lines of business and our communities. While every municipality is focused on digital initiatives, we're not all focused on the same things, and that's because our communities and our priorities differ. But municipalities are very well connected, and we learn from each other. The pilots of others we will learn from as they will learn from ours. So we don't necessarily compare to one another, but we learn from one another. And I did want to point out that the Digital Oakville 2021 plan supports each of the town's priorities, which I will speak to in further slides. So the Digital Oakville strategy, this was approved by Council back in 2017. And well before that, priority was given to modernizing our services and our infrastructure. Simply, Digital Oakville aims to make Oakville the most digitally connected community. And it aims to do that through online services, partnerships and data management, and the implementation of digital infrastructure. And underlying all of that is leveraging the investments we've made to date, of which there have been many. This isn't about a one and done and move on. This is about looking at what we've implemented, learning, adjusting, and expanding those lessons learned elsewhere in the organization. I did want to spend a few minutes speaking about the Digital Oakville team. We have chosen an embedded model at the town, and this means that every commissioner and department head is responsible for its digital transformation. That's because the connection to the resident or the user is closest at the department level. It also ensures greater responsiveness and is a wonderful support to employee engagement. This is not something that's being imposed on our departments. This is how we do our business. And embedding that responsibility across the organization ensures that our management team understands how their business lines are going to be impacted by these digital changes facing us. So the decision not to place this responsibility into one department or one position was quite purposeful. It is a team approach. And having said that, we do need to tie everything together. And that's why the Strategic Initiatives and Communications Department has been formed. This department is about breaking down the silos, ensuring that the connections between the different projects and initiatives are made, and that we nurture a project management and continuous improvement culture within this organization, and that we focus on clear objectives and results. And along with our commissioners, many of our directors are here online with us tonight because it's their projects that we're showcasing tonight. So before we look ahead, I did want to look back a little bit. I've mentioned the solid foundation on which we continue to build. This is a visual of where we are now. It is by no means, it doesn't include everything, but it does give a sense of where we've been focused. And again, it's on that underlying infrastructure. Whether it's our control systems for our streetlights, our transit operations, or our buildings, free Wi-Fi access points across town, or the use of field tablets and telematics in our vehicles to help manage our service levels. And we've invested in our customer service capabilities through online registrations, payments, and Service Oakville. But now we get to the fun part, which is where we're going. And 2021 is all about improved customer service, engagement and partnerships, and the continued expansion of our infrastructure, which I'm now going to outline in a little bit more detail. So online services. This supports the livability and mobility priorities of Council. And there has been significant interest in our applications, our permits, and our licenses. And these functions will move fully online in 2021. So this covers our planning, our development, and our building services. It covers off our business licensing and our parking and community-related permits. And under these projects, we're using what's called a minimally viable product model. And that's about implementing a simple yet functional solution that will improve over time based on user feedback. Again, it's not a one and done. It's a solution that will mature and continue to grow based on user input. We're also looking at improving our registration and our bookings. So you can book an inspection online shortly and change that scheduled inspection. Residents will see a new registration system for recreation and culture programs, and they'll have added offerings of being able to purchase memberships online and doing facility booking, starting with last-minute ice. A simple, easy process to see what's available and be able to book it all online with ease. And we'll be looking to expand what else you can do online, again, based on user feedback. For transit, for our designated areas in Oakville that do not have the rider volumes that can support conventional transit models, we are implementing a real-time ride-hailing mobile app that will allow customers to book, schedule, and track their requested ride. This is similar to an Uber-like experience and will significantly improve the quality and capacity of service provided as we build our ridership levels to warrant a conventional model of service. Moving on to our partnerships and data management in 2021. This supports the engaged community, accountable government, and our environmental priorities. We're focused on learning from the community, increasing our data analytics abilities, and working with our regional and municipal counterparts. I've already mentioned the importance of user feedback, and this is as we mature our services offered to make sure that they're meeting our user needs and they are as simple of a solution as possible. We're also learning from the business community and testing solutions. So for example, this year at Town Hall, we have an office lighting pilot underway. And we're focused on improving our energy management in our buildings and exploring predictive modeling solutions for our assets that will continue to drive down our costs and ensure a sustainable budget. And there is work underway regionally. To the mayor's earlier point, we don't do this alone. And we're focused on improving the network connections across the region and the GTHA. Moving forward to digital infrastructure. This supports the livability, mobility, and environment strategic priorities, and there is a lot of work underway in this area. I would, however, just like to focus on a few key projects. We continue to expand our free Wi-Fi access points. This year, you will see that in our downtown core, as well as beginning implementation on our buses. And we're working with the region and our telecommunication providers to expand and improve our network connections. As mentioned earlier tonight, we are also adding more electric vehicle charging stations. We already have several implemented in the town, and we'll have 46 by the end of this year. The other one I wanted to note was the implementation of parking sensors. And this will show available parking in our downtown core, which will allow for easier access and certainly reduce some driver frustration. It'll allow for easier access to our downtown and predictive modeling opportunities so we can understand the parking usage and then make changes based on the data. The results and lessons learned from this can then be applied, duplicated elsewhere in the town. I've mentioned continuous improvement and lessons learned a few times in this presentation. Driving as much value from our investments as possible, duplicating our successes in other areas of the town are a key component of our plan. So whether it's our streetlight control, our on-equipment telematics, we'll continue to test, receive feedback, modify, and improve. This year, for example, we are publicly launching a leafing program tracker. And that's for our bulk loose leaf program. And this builds on the snowplow tracker that we've had implemented for quite some time. And it's a great example of how we've taken one solution and we're expanding it into another area of service. Looking forward beyond 2021, we're going to be revamping our website, oakville.ca. We'll have an improved content management system with easier navigation and user-focused content. We'll also be implementing new Service Oakville features, which will allow more self-serve, an improved report a problem process, and greater information sharing. We're also going to see, you can turn the slide, please. We're also going to see online property tax services as well. And finally, recognizing the knowledge and experience that many local companies have in digital innovation, we will be exploring potential opportunities to continue to engage, test, and learn. In closing, our approach is focused. We're focused on these three areas, along with the leveraging of our existing infrastructure. And the town's commitment to our connected community well positions us to take advantage of the economic, the social, and the environmental opportunities offered through increased digital infrastructure. So on that note, I would be happy to answer any questions, as are the directors also online for any of their specific projects.
Thank you very much for a very, very good report. Council, over to you for questions. Councillor Hazlitt-Thiel, thank you.
Thank you very much for an excellent presentation. It was very informative. I do have a couple clarifying questions. I really appreciate the fact that we're going to evolve our systems based on user feedback. But could you give us a little bit more insight on how the residents and the users can participate in that process? Is there some structure to it? I would hope it's not just complaint driven, that there's an opportunity for them to say, here are some ways that I would like to use it better or differently. Could you give us a little more context, Julie?
Yes, it will not be complaint driven. We will be proactively reaching out to the users on feedback for what they find working well, what needs improvement, and what more they would like to see. So it is a proactive reach out. It's not going to be passive.
So thank you for that. And in terms of the parking sensors, so all the BIAs would be excited about wayfinding, et cetera. Is there a requirement for somebody to be digitally savvy in order to be able to, understand our parking wayfinding? In other words, as you're developing these, are you thinking about the user, the different level of user capabilities?
Yes, we are. In fact, one of the principles of our online service moving forward is that outside-in approach. It's not the inside-out. So it is taking it from the user perspective to make it as simple and functional as possible. Not overly complicated, nice and easy. That's a key principle for us.
Thanks very much.
Thank you, Councillor. Councillor O'Meara.
Thank you very much. Julie, one of the consistent struggles we have is communicating with our residents, or residents coming to us and saying, well, I never heard about this. And, and then we say, well, we advertised in the Oakville Beaver and you didn't get it at the end of your driveway. So I'm wondering what we have in mind in terms of getting a more sort of dynamic way in terms of letting our community know about things that are going on, so that they can make informed decisions about what to be a part of or what not to be a part of. Might you be able to speak to that, or is that a part of the digital strategy, or whatever comments you have? I'm happy to listen.
So it's definitely a part of the communication side of the department, and we have been having conversations about that very question. I do not have an answer for you right now, but we do recognize the need to approach different ways of trying to communicate our messages out there. So I hear your comment, and we are considering options.
Thank you very much. I appreciate it.
There's been a lot of stuff written on communications, and last week I participated in a Harvard Bloomberg seminar for mayors on how to communicate better. And one of the most interesting things I heard was the residents of the cities of the world include a large number who believe in a freedom to be let alone, or freedom not to know. And it's always very frustrating for everyone, I heard from all over the world, when having energetically ignored stuff going on, they then come and complain, when were you going to tell me? So, the world is full of these push me, pull me problems. Councillor Lischina.
Thank you, Your Worship. Now I should remove the hand, my inaugural electronic hand. Thank you, Julie. Excellent presentation. I read this with a lot of excitement, actually. But one of the things I'm wondering about as we move into increased digitization, how is cybersecurity looked at in all of these put together?
So that is a focus. I would actually ask if Sam, if our Director of IT Solutions is online, if he could maybe speak to that. Sam, are you here? There you are.
This will be a fun test.
Look how fast
he unmuted himself and lit his picture, and it looks like he's on the bridge of the Star Trek Enterprise. So I'm looking forward to a very spacey answer.
Star Trek fan. You don't want to see my actual home background, trust me. But the answer is yes, absolutely. Cybersecurity is definitely something that we're investing in. In fact, I posted for an IT security manager, and in that we're going to be looking at things like firewalls, IDS, IPS, not to get too technical, but in essence, controls. I mean, with the understanding that you can never absolutely reduce cyber risk to zero, but you can certainly mitigate it. So we'll be looking at mitigation strategies for all the different types of connections that we have across the board, such as our traffic network, which would be SCADA controls, our internal network, not just perimeter, but also threats from within, threats from outside the organization, et cetera, so that we can greatly reduce our cyber risk and improve our cyber posture.
Okay.
The next one is then Councillor Knoll.
Thank you, Your Worship. As you can imagine, this report is very exciting to a computer nerd like me. And I'm very excited by all of these initiatives. I just have two questions. One is, and I've spoken to the CAO about this a couple times, I think, and I know that it's probably coming, and I hope I didn't miss this in the presentation. I was studying both the report and the slides as we were going because I was fascinated by some of the commentary. But one of the things I find frustrating, and I know my constituents find frustrating, is the lack of up-to-date bylaws that are indexable, searchable, and readily available to constituents. It's a crazy chase to try to find the most current bylaw information, which is ultimately, the underpinnings of everything we do. And I'm wondering where that fits in this. I know that there's a challenge around the consolidation of bylaws, but where does this fall on the priority list, and when can we expect to see some sort of comprehensive process similar to what the province has in their e-laws library?
So I understand some recent improvements have been made to that, but I would suggest that the website rebuild, the oakville.ca rebuild, which will contain improved content management, would help with that. And that's a future project. That's a beyond 2021.
Okay. I kind of question that. There's two things I question about in terms of the scheduling. One is that, and the second is online tax access. I constantly get bugged by my own family as well as members of the general public about the fact they can't sign on and see what their tax status is. They can't do anything electronically on taxes. And I know a lot of municipalities have already embraced online tax services, so I'm assuming that the software is available. So why is that and bylaw, which are two very customer-facing, customer-centric services, why are those being put off into the future?
I would say they're being put off into the very near future. We are currently undertaking the RFP process for both of those. So we're at the beginning of that, but work is beginning to occur on both of those, the rebuild and on
I saw the tax thing said beyond 2021. So when I see something like that, that kind of worries me that that's kind of a project, that's indeterminate in the future. So there is a process in place where we're going to get something more succinct within the near term.
Yes, because we're just starting the RFP, that's why I chose to go the beyond 2021 and not any more detail there. But there is work this fiscal year on both of those projects.
Okay, just to circle back to the issue around bylaw, you're talking about the fact that CMS...
Councillor Knoll, excuse me.
Yes.
If you would just wait, I'd like to bring the CAO into the conversation. She has something to add to your point.
That'd be lovely. Thank you.
Commissioner, Madam CAO.
Through you,
somebody.
Through you, Mayor Burton. Can you hear me? All right. Councillor Knoll, I know you and I have had this conversation a few times actually on the consolidation of bylaws. And while the solution to view it online and have access to it easy online is very much a digital solution, I think the first step in that is actually getting the consolidation of all those bylaws together. Which is a slightly different exercise from just the digital component of it, getting it onto the website. So I'm going to suggest to you that I don't think we had shown it on the strategic plan. So it is perhaps something that we should look at as part of those strategic plan initiatives going forward, which is another report you actually have on the agenda. Because that would be a specific project and consolidation of bylaws and not just the digital solution.
Great. So, and that's where I was about to ask that question to clarify around the CMS. A robust and easily searchable CMS is a very important aspect of any form of web-based presence. But that doesn't necessarily, to your point, Madam CAO, that doesn't necessarily drive the content itself. So I'm very pleased to hear that this could be something that could potentially be placed on the order paper for a strategic plan, because I do think that as things become more and more, and particularly during COVID, I think there's a real need to be able to get up-to-date information on our bylaws. And I would really hope that that's something we can get our firm handle on. And the tax thing as well, I'm pleased to hear that that will be something we'll hear more about soon. Thank you.
Thanks very much, Councillor. I'm not seeing any other questions, so I'll look for a motion. Councillor Hazlitt-Deal, thank you. Is there any objection to the motion? Seeing none, it carries. Thank you, everybody. That brings us to Speak of the Devil, the Council Strategic Plan Refresh. And the plan here is that basically we're going to take 2 weeks, I believe it is. Anyway, we're going to take a little bit of time to send back any new ideas that occur to us after sleeping on this and consulting with our constituents on this to finalize it next month. So with that, I'd like to bring in Dorothy St. George, and as I said, she is the Director of Economic Development. She is approaching the podium now. So as long as you keep the main feed of the council, you'll get her momentarily. Ms. St. George, you have the Zoom.
And good evening, members of council. As Mayor Burton indicated, the report before you is an interim stage in the update of Council Strategic Plan. And this evening, you will receive a presentation from our new Manager of Corporate Strategy, Sabraj Maan, and he will provide an update on the findings of our recent consultations, our one-on-one consultations with you. And as Mayor Burton indicated, we will be coming back to this for a final report in May, and we look forward to your further input to this process in the next couple of weeks. I'll turn it over to Sabraj.
Thank you, Dorothy, and good evening, Your Worship and members of council. I'm not able to start video. If the clerk department could enable that.
Well, we do see the presentation, and now we see you.
Okay, perfect. Thank you. Yeah, as Dorothy mentioned, we're here today to provide council with the draft annual progress report on the town's major initiatives for this term of council as part of a report on the council strategic plan refresh. First of all, thank you to Your Worship and each member of council for providing some initial input and feedback and representing community members in this process. And as the Mayor and Dorothy mentioned, this is a process. The elements of this report are in draft form, and there will be further opportunity for input over the coming weeks. Next slide, please. For this evening's agenda, we'll first provide some background on the need for the draft strategic plan refresh and the process that was undertaken. We'll then talk about the input that was received from councillors, and then briefly go through the draft progress report outlining the major initiatives for this term of council. Following that, we'll give an overview of some of the priority areas identified through the refresh, in particular capital projects and the need for a pandemic recovery plan, and then we'll discuss next steps. Next slide, please. Starting with the background, Council's strategic plan provides the framework to make decisions, set priorities, and allocate resources. In 2007, Council adopted the town's vision, mission, and values that are now well familiar, including the vision to be the most livable town in Canada. For this term of Council, Council approved the 2019 to 2022 Council strategic plan in April of 2019, including the 5 areas of focus: livability, engaged community, accountable government, environment, and mobility. And since then, staff has continued to work tirelessly on implementation and ensuring that resources are appropriately allocated to the major initiatives under each area of focus. However, in light of the pandemic and other considerations that we're going to get into, there is a need for the refresh to the strategic plan, as the Mayor also pointed out during the State of the Town address last October. For the process for the refresh, staff developed a draft progress report that outlined the major initiatives for this term of council. The progress report was then shared with the Mayor and members of council, and individual meetings were held to provide additional input and feedback on the refresh. After these meetings, staff provided further input on the refresh, with this recommendation report coming before council this evening. And again, that 2-week period before the final report will be tabled at the council meeting on May 25th. Next slide, please. For what staff heard from members of council, overall, the strategic plan remains largely valid in terms of its 5 areas of focus and the key objectives. However, the need for the refresh was validated, partly as a result of the pandemic, but also because of some of the following broader trends, opportunities, and challenges. Climate change remains a critical priority for council, especially in light of the climate emergency declaration. There's also ongoing financial uncertainty and a desire to keep taxes at or below the rate of inflation, highlighting the need to demonstrate value and leverage efficiencies. The town's demographics also continue to shift, which underscores the importance of diversity and inclusion efforts and responding to changing community needs. Technological disruptions are also expected to continue to have workforce impacts, including related to autonomous equipment and remote work. Service models will also need to respond to and reflect changing community needs, especially with changing demand patterns, such as for outdoor recreation, parks, transit, and other areas. And finally, housing affordability was brought up as presenting a broader challenge for the community. Together, these are all important factors for council and the town to bear in mind for this term of council and beyond, especially through the development of strategic plans and master plans. Next slide, please. Moving on to the draft progress report in Appendix A of the report. This draft progress report outlines a number of the major initiatives for this term of council, broken down by the 5 areas of focus from the strategic plan. I won't walk through each one, but I'll highlight some of the ones completed or planned to be completed within this term of council, including a number of the elements that Director Clark mentioned in her presentation on Digital Oakville, as well as the 2019 survey with a 96% satisfaction rating from citizens, the opening of Oakville Trafalgar Community Center, the opening of fire stations 3 and 8, the expansion to 46 electric vehicle charging stations, the first electric buses entering service, onboard Wi-Fi on transit, adding 30 kilometers of active transportation infrastructure, and a neighborhood traffic safety program. I would also note for council that the draft progress report has some clarifications and additions from the previous version that was shared with members of council based on the questions and input that staff received. The progress report also outlines the impacts of the pandemic on the last page in the green, including initiatives that had to be deferred and the town's pandemic response. Next slide, please. For the refresh, members of council identified 5 priority areas for the town to address during this term of council. The number 1 item was a pandemic recovery plan to manage the recovery period. This plan would include learnings and best practices with some key components, including managing ongoing financial sustainability and demonstrating value, as well as improving business supports, including via processing applications expeditiously, advocating with other levels of government, and evaluating the role of the town in supporting small businesses. Also, adapting program and service delivery in a cost-effective way to respond to shifting usage and preferences, including for parks, recreation, and transit. The other key point here was on planning for special events with a diversity and inclusion lens, and an understanding that the community may be hesitant in returning to indoor or large-scale events for at least a while. Also, appropriately managing the resourcing and enforcement of bylaws and provincial orders was also identified, especially as it relates to crowds and parking. And planning for workforce-related impacts from a corporate and community perspective. So those are some of the areas identified for the recovery plan. The second priority area that members of council identified is continuing to promote safe and efficient travel on town roads through a number of measures, including traffic calming, reduced speed limits, automated speed enforcement, and active transportation infrastructure. The The next priority area was related to reducing the response time for processing permits and applications, as well as improving communications with applicants, including implementing online systems and the business stream pilot for non-residential building permits. The fourth priority area, which we've also talked about this evening, was enhancing communications about the town's programs and services. Members of council also desire more consistent messaging across the town that would speak to process improvements, as well as communication about how the town makes decisions and how the town's reviews, plans, and studies fit together. And lastly, capital projects. Members of council identified various capital projects for this term of council, including those related to increased use of outdoor parks and recreation facilities. Now, as the planning for the 10-year capital budget gets underway, staff will undertake consultations on this front, and that will feed into the 2022 budget process this year. Next slide, please. As a next step, staff invites council to provide additional input on the draft refresh. As mentioned previously, there will be a 2-week window for members of council to provide additional input by May 7th, during which we will also incorporate staff's ongoing input before that final progress report and refresh will be tabled for council on May 25th. Again, thank you to the mayor and each member of council for your ongoing engagement. We're happy to take any questions or to hear any input or feedback at this time as we bring forward a recommendation to council that this report be received.
Thank you very much, Mr. Mann. The questions are lining up for you. Councillor Adams is first.
Thank you very much, and congratulations on such a stunning, inspiring, and I got to say, brilliant background on your Zoom background choice. It's very, very impressive. But that being said, I did want to ask you a question about how particular projects or particular issues can get incorporated into the refresh. I know that when we met, Councillor Listrina and I had a list of projects or issues that we wanted to make sure got taken care of over the next little while. They got fed in, and I can see the buckets in the program that you've outlined tonight that are there. But how can we make sure that they get taken care
of? Through the chair, thank you, Councillor Adams. As I mentioned, there are a number of capital projects that council and councillors have identified. As we're getting into the process for the 10-year capital budget over the next few weeks and months, there will be consultations on that front to allocate resources and prioritize accordingly as part of the 2022 budget process as well. So stay tuned.
So even though, some of it you don't think would actually show up within the refresh document itself, it would show up later within the capital planning. Is that what you're saying?
Yes, that's correct. As we go through the process of the 10-year capital plan and the 2022 budget process, yes, that's correct.
Okay, so I think that's fair for some of the capital projects. For some of the particular issues around traffic and speeding and safety, I know that we've been working with our traffic engineering team as well on this, but we want to make sure that those particular issues are getting captured properly to our satisfaction. How might we ensure that?
I know there's a new neighborhood traffic safety program. If Commissioner Fu is on the line or her designate, she may be able to speak further to that. Or otherwise, we can get that information and report back to you.
And I'm happy to do that over the next 2 weeks. I just want to make sure that there's a method by which council members can make sure that and I'm sure we're not alone on this, that there are particular local initiatives that we want to make sure they get captured properly and don't get forgotten.
Councillor, thank you very much for those points. I would like to suggest that no matter which document you think it might wind up in, you put your suggestions in over the next 2 weeks, regardless. And council, in the end, the document is council's document. So in the end, council will decide what's in its document. So don't hold yourself back. Your colleagues each of us wants all of our colleagues to know what we want. So I urge each and every one of you to put in over the next 2 weeks the things you want, whether they're capital budget or strategic plan. There's, in my mind, nothing wrong with having them in both documents. So at the very least, let's try to get them in both documents. It's a nice way of having a guiding document as we then consider the capital budget. I'm not seeing any other questions, and I'll look for a motion. And Councillor Elgar has the fastest reflexes tonight. Is there any objection to the motion? Madam Clerk, there being none, Councillor Elgar's motion carries. We now come to the item number 6, the sale of the former Brantwood school site. And Council, we've received a notice of motion and recommendations have been provided to Councillor Giddings and Councillor Haslett-Thiel regarding their desire to change the recommendation before you. And so a series of 3 motions are required for them to succeed. And they are, first, to move reconsideration. And the second is to then waive the procedure bylaw to allow consideration of, actually, Madam Clerk, isn't it the other order? Don't we have to waive the procedure bylaw first to allow consideration of the notice of motion to reconsider?
The first step would be to put forward, to bring forward a notice of motion.
Right, so the first motion is, a notice of motion which we've received. To consider a notice of motion tonight, we have to waive the procedure bylaw because normally the procedure bylaw provides that a notice of motion is heard at the next council meeting. So Councillor Dudek, I recognize you, but I'd like to just finish laying out the 3 steps. So the first step is to, we've received the notice of motion, and if we're going to consider it tonight, we have to waive the procedure bylaw. The second step is then to vote on whether or not to reconsider. And the third step would be to then vote the proposed change to the recommendation. So I hope that's fairly clear. And Councillor Dudek, you have the Zoom. It's possible you just wanted to move the...
That's correct, Your Worship.
Okay. All right. If you object to waiving the procedure, I guess I'll call... Normally I go, is there any objection? I believe that council may have a divided opinion on this. So I'll just call the vote in those for and those against. If you're in favor of waiving the procedure bylaw, please raise your hand so I can count you. I count 6. 1, 2, 3. Don't take your hands down. Somebody took their hands down. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. I count 7 this time. And those against waiving the procedure bylaw, raise your hands. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. Somebody's not voting because there's 15 of us and I've got 7 for each side. All right, let's have a roll call vote. Madam Clerk, would you call the vote? Starting, you call out the person's name and you say yes if you're in favor of waiving the procedure bylaw, and you say no if you're against waiving the procedure bylaw.
Okay, we'll start with Councillor Adams. Are you for or
No.
against?
Against?
Councillor Chisholm, for or against?
For.
Councillor Dudek, for or against?
For.
Councillor Elgar, for or against?
For.
Councillor Giddings, for or against?
For.
Councillor Grant, for or against?
Against?
Councillor Haslett Theo, for or against?
For.
Councillor Knoll, for or against?
Against?
Councillor Lischina, for or against?
I was having some difficulty hearing earlier. Could you just repeat one more time, please?
Would you like to vote for or against waiving the procedure bylaw? Sorry? You're muted.
Against?
Against. Councillor Longo, for or against?
Against.
Councillor O'Meara, for or against?
Against.
Councillor Parmar, for or against?
For.
Councillor Sandhu, for or against?
For.
And Councillor Robertson, for or against?
Against.
Okay, so we have 1, 2, 3, and Mayor Burton, sorry.
Against.
1, 2, 5, 6, 7, 8. We have 8 against waiving the procedure bylaw and 7 for, so against wins.
All right, thank you, council. That's what you call close. So now, is there a motion in favor of the staff recommendation of option 3? Councillor Knoll, thank you. On the assumption of a division still remaining on council on this question, I'll suggest that the clerk call the vote by roll again. Madam Clerk?
May I just clarify that we are voting on the staff recommendation in the public and the confidential report?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes.
I just wanted to. All right, Mayor Burton.
I am for it.
Councillor Adams?
For?
Councillor Chisholm?
Against?
Councillor Duddick?
Against, and I believe Councillor Haslett Theo was trying to get her hand up at the onset, so she wasn't seen.
Councillor Haslett Thiel?
Mayor Burton, I think we are often given the opportunity to speak to a motion before the vote. Is that correct?
Councillor Haslett Thiel, please, you have the Zoom. We'll delay the vote.
Thanks very much. So I absolutely appreciate that everybody will have some different perspectives on this and for the consideration of my council colleagues. It was unfortunate that we didn't realize that Brentwood would be on the agenda and couldn't have moved the motion last month, but that is what happened, and that's the circumstance. The reason that I would ask you to vote against the staff recommendation is because I believe our circumstances have changed. While we've always known that Midtown will be a growth corridor, it's been in the far distance. And there is no doubt that what we've experienced in COVID is that our parks are meeting capacity and over capacity. And while we're all excited about Midtown and the opportunity to create something special there, there is no doubt that they will not have access to a lot of green space and even traditional green space. And so they will gravitate to public parks, and we welcome them across all of Oakville to, of course, use them. But our parks, particularly within walking distance, will be over capacity at some point with those kind of numbers. We don't have an opportunity really to get back more green space. We have an opportunity with the current market conditions that are out there to do something special, to balance both optimizing the value of those lands and also providing green space for the future. We're not asking for the preservation of all of the park. We understand that there are circumstances that require us to sell at least 6 of those lots. But we are asking for your consideration that there's a new generation coming. They need more green space. And this is an opportunity to hold on to one. And there is a way to do it and still generate the income that we have patiently waited to earn off those lands. So it's my one last plea. I do hope that you would find that there is a different solution that can get us to a good place for everybody. And that includes active green space being a priority. And I thank you for your consideration, whichever way you go.
Thank you, Councillor. Are there other speakers? Councillor Elgar.
Yeah, through you, Mayor Burton. Listening to the councillor speak, is there something we could do as a council to allot a period of time to see whether 6 could bring the amount of money that we thought 7 would bring? Like if you gave an extension of, say, try to sort it out, if they give them 3 months, but if it doesn't happen, then we're back to the number 7 again. If they would actively do that, would that be an option that council could consider?
If council defeats the main motion, council can consider, well, council has to reconsider if it changes from 7 to 6.
Right.
That.
I hear you. But I guess what I'm saying is 7 to 6 with only you only get 3 months to. If it doesn't happen, then we're back at 7. That's what I'm just wondering if we could do something like that to try to give them a fighting chance.
We've been trying to sell this land since 2013. 2 years ago, we changed the plan because there was a suggestion that if we did it differently, we would get more money. And now we're back. Another 3 months is just, in my view, another delay based on the advice that we've received from the MDC. But anyway, in order to change the number from 7 to 6 requires 10 votes.
Right. I get it. Okay, well, we'll see how this goes. Thank you.
Thank you. All right, Madam Clerk, would you call the vote? You can start over.
So we're calling the vote on the staff recommendation.
Yes.
Mayor Burton?
I'm in favor of it, yes.
Councillor Adams?
For?
Councillor Chisholm?
Against?
Councillor Dudek?
Against?
Councillor Elgar?
Against?
Councillor Giddings?
Against.
Councillor Grant?
For?
Councillor Haslett-Theo?
Against?
Councillor Knoll?
For?
Councillor Lischina?
I think I heard you. These are dying on me, so if this is for the staff report, then yes.
It is.
4.
4. Okay. Councillor Longo?
For?
Councillor O'Meara?
4.
Councillor Parmar?
4.
Councillor Sandhu?
4.
And Councillor Robertson?
4.
We have a win for the staff recommendation.
It's 10-5. The motion carries. Thank you, everybody. I would just point out for everybody's possible information that we just built a new park and a new community center in that area. And I I would hope that we don't believe that there'll be no parkland in Midtown, because I don't believe that's the case. Now, Council, you have before you a confidential report seeking an authorization from Oakville Enterprises. Rob Lister and Sean McCann are available if you have questions, in which case we would go into camera. But it's a pretty straightforward matter, and you're entitled to pass it in public if you wish. Is there a motion? Councillor O'Meara? Thank you.
Move.
Thank you for your motion. Is there an objection to the motion? Madam Clerk, seeing none, the motion carries. Council, I would ask you now to turn to the weighty matter of approving the minutes of the Accessibility Advisory Committee meeting of March 11th. And Councillor Adams, thank you for the motion. Any objection to the motion? Madam Clerk, there being none, that carries. A motion to rise and report to Council is in order now. Councillor Palmer, thank you. Any objection? Madam Clerk, there being no objection, that motion carries. I rise and report that the Committee of the Whole has met and has made recommendations on consent items 7.1, .2, .3, .4, .5, .6, and .7. Discussion items 9.1, 9.2, 9.3, 9.4, 9.5, and 9.6. And confidential discussion items 10.1 and 10.2, and the advisory committee minutes. Could I have a mover and seconder for the report? Councillor Knoll and Councillor Sandew, thank you. Any objection to the motion? There being none, the report is adopted. You have your information items, which are circulated electronically, and your status of outstanding issues. And under new business, we have, in accordance with section 14.12 of the procedure bylaw, a notice of motion that will be considered at the next council meeting to be held on May 25th. And that motion is the one we discussed earlier, which is the notice of motion by Councillor Ray Chisholm and Councillor Sean O'Meara to support phase out of the gas-fired electricity generation in Ontario. And as I understand it, the public is widely interested in this, and we may receive delegations at that meeting. And Councillor Chisholm and Councillor O'Meara, thank you for bringing this forward. I would like to offer under the congratulatory section of new business, I'd like to offer my personal congratulations and possibly those of the entire council to Councillor Sandew on the creation of SLPC, and that is the Sandew Legal Professional Corporation. And as a serial entrepreneur myself, I applaud your initiative, and I wish you every success with that. And I saw virtual applause for you on the screen. Councillor Sandew, I understand you might have a note of congratulations for someone as well.
I do. Thank you, Mayor Burton, very much for your very kind words, and thank you to all my council colleagues for the support as well. I also just wanted to take a moment to wish my father a happy 70th birthday. We haven't been able to see each other since January of 2020. So everybody, please wish him a happy 70th birthday with me.
Well, Councillor Elgar and I can welcome him to the over 70 club now. And you can tell him it's not that bad.
I'll be sure to let him know. Thanks, Mayor Burton.
Well, you know, the old standby line is, it's way better than the alternative. So it's good to keep in mind. I'm not aware of any requests for reports, except that we have circulated to you. Councillor Knoll, I'll come to you in a second, and we'll get your request for report. But I have circulated to you the request that the staff report back to council on the relocation of the Two Wharf headquarters and operations. And Madam Clerk, are you telling me that we don't need a vote to approve that request for report?
No, they do.
All right. So I need a seconder for my request for report. Councillor Longo, would you oblige me? Thank you. Councillor Longo represents us on the 2-Wharf Committee. Is there any objection to the request for report? Madam Clerk, I see none. The request is approved. Councillor Knoll.
Actually, I got to back up one agenda item. I was still on new business of other natures. I just wanted to take a moment to, well, first of all, congratulate Councillor Sandu. I think I may be her first client. I'm not sure, at least in the first couple. But more importantly, no offense, Jazz, I want to announce the arrival of my 6th grandchild on Saturday, the 17th of April. And we are very pleased to welcome young Jonah to the family, who was born to my daughter and son-in-law, John and Bryn. So congratulations, guys, and welcome to almost a baseball team.
Well, congratulations. You're going to recreate the Waltons, if you remember. Are you old enough to remember that show?
I am old enough to remember the Waltons. Good night, John Boy.
Councillor Longo, did I see your hand as well?
So with Councillor Sandu's well wishes to her father, I realized that my father just had a birthday and turned 81. So he's now, as I remind him, in his 9th decade, and he doesn't appreciate that. And he still refers to me as Councillor Longo. I don't understand why. Every time I call him, Councillor Longo. So anyway, just want to wish him a happy birthday as well.
Well, congratulations to one and all for these landmarks. Councillor Haslett-Thiel, I see your hand, and Jeff's is still up too, so we'll come back to Jeff. Councillor Haslett-Thiel.
So I think I will chime in and say that congratulations to my daughter Katie for being accepted to her Master's of Architecture at the University of British Columbia and for leading the architecture team that won the Solar Decathlon for North America. We're very proud of you, Kate.
Wow. That's doing some good. That's very much appreciated. I congratulate you and her. The other day we were in a Zoom meeting, and I wondered because Councillor Janet Haslett-Thiel was presenting on screen. It said Katie Haslett-Thiel, Katie Thiel, I think it said. So there you go. All right, if there's no other business, then a mover and seconder for consideration and reading of the bylaws is in order. Councillor Farmer and Councillor Chisholm have the top reflexes on this round. Is there any objection to the motion? Madam Clerk, seeing none, the consideration and reading of the bylaws motion carries. Thank you, everybody, for your time and attention and your very careful deliberations tonight. It has been terrific working with you, and that ends the meeting.